Chapter 1913. Ning Xuema was seriously injured, so the amount of strength she could use was limited. At most, her slap only made his cheeks turn red, but it didn't cause any real harm to him. "IMO, I know you are angry, so I will give you a few slaps to vent your anger. I will not avoid it." Luo Jiuchen was still smiling, and his eyes were even sincere. From now on, if he wanted to get Ning Xuema, he could only pursue her seriously and not force her. He thought that after hearing his words, Ning Xuema would say, "I will not slap you. I am afraid of dirtying my hands." He even thought of a countermeasure. However, he did not expect Ning Xuema to smile. "Okay, you said it." She raised her hand and slapped him dozens of times in a row. Luo Jiuchen was speechless because he had said that he would not avoid it. Naturally, he could only endure it. His handsome face was slapped until it turned purple. He could not smile anymore. In the end, he finally took a step back and avoided Ning Xuema's hand. Are you done?" Ning Xuema took a few breaths. After all, she was seriously injured and could barely stand. At this moment her wrist was numb. She rubbed her wrist and only said one word to Luo Jiuchen. "Go away." Luo Jiuchen was angry. "You should go away. I am the real owner of Fantian Palace now." Ning Xuema took another breath. "Okay, then let's go." Luo Jiuchen choked. "I didn't chase you away." He seemed a little annoyed. "Although this place already belongs to me, you can still stay here. I'm not such a heartless person. Alright, it's getting late. I'm going to rest." He turned and left in a hurry. He knew that if he stayed, it would only make things worse. So it was better to leave. Ning Xuema's eyes flickered slightly. It was good that the bastard left. She would leave, but she would leave with what she should take with her. The door of Fantian Palace slowly closed behind them. The 8 mythological beasts escorted Ning Xuema and little Nianma out of the palace. Luo Jiuchen stood at the door, unwilling to give up. His eyes fell on Ning Xuema. "Imo, do you have to leave?" Ning Xuema ignored him and let Qiongqi carry her forward. "Imo, I'll definitely make you come back in the future," Luo Jiuchen said from behind as if he was making a vow. Ning Xuema still didn't look back, but the corners of her lips curled up slightly. She would definitely come back to take his life. The 8 divine beasts clustered around the two of them and left without looking back. They gradually disappeared into the distance. Luo Jiuchen stood alone in front of Fantian Palace, looking at her back, his fingers clenched in his sleeves. After a while he slowly smiled. It seemed that this girl was still very forgetful. Did she forget what happened 50,000 years ago, when she lost her power and was driven out of the Fantian Palace? Although she did not lose her power this time, there was not much difference between such a serious injury and losing her power. If she returned to the Devil Kingdom in this state, it would undoubtedly be no different than a sheep in a pack of wolves. As long as he revealed the news to the people in the Devil Kingdom, the tragedy of 50,000 years ago would definitely happen again. He could not hurt her because of the oath, but it did not mean that others could not hurt her. As long as he did not do it himself, it would not be considered a violation of the oath. He would save her after she was tortured to the brink of death. Then, she would understand that she could not go anywhere except Fantian Palace. Naturally, she would seek his protection and agree to any of his conditions. Chapter 1914. He turned around and looked at the gate of the Fantian Palace. A real smile finally appeared on his face. He had finally become the master of the Fantian Palace. He had been waiting for this day for a long time. From now on, the 6 realms would belong to him. He had finally ascended to the highest position. He turned around and entered the palace. The entire Fantian Palace was quiet, and there was no sound at all. The wind blew through the treetops, and he could only hear his own footsteps on the stone pavement. He thought that the 8 mythological beasts were the guardian beasts of heaven and earth, so he wanted to force them to stay. However, Bai Zai's words made him speechless. "We were saved by the Divine Lord. We are only loyal to the Divine Lord and his descendants." Luo Jiuchen could not force them to stay, so he could only watch them leave with Ning Xuema and her daughter. It did not matter. Even if there was no one here now, it did not matter. As long as he sat on the throne, he would not be afraid that no one would be loyal to him. He strolled to the door of Shunjuli's study and wanted to push the door open. He wanted to go in and see the books left by Shunjuli. Since he could not destroy them, he could at least read them. However, he did not expect to encounter an obstacle when he pushed the door open. The door disappeared, and the entire study was shrouded in a cloud of white light. Luo Jiuchen was stunned for a moment. He sneered and began to think of a way to break the door. After an hour, he looked at the study that still looked like an eggshell, and finally gave up. He clenched his fists. It seemed that Shunjuli was more wary of him than of a thief. He knew that the Fantion Palace would change owners in the future, so he made all kinds of preparations in advance. Luo Jiuchen did live in the Fantion Palace, but there were many places that he could not enter. For example, Shunjuli's study, bedroom, and even the side hall where Ning Xuema lived had a thick wizardry barrier that could not be opened. It seemed that the moment Ning Xuema and the rest left, these wizardry barriers automatically activated and did not allow anyone to enter. "Mother, where are we going?" Nianma asked his mother carefully. "Back to the Emo Palace." Ning Xuema answered with 3 words. Bai Zhe followed closely beside the mother and daughter. It was worried. "Devil Master, you're seriously injured now. I'm afraid that the demons in Emo Palace will change. They had been alive for 50,000 years. At that time, the little devil lord had lost his power and was captured by the people of the devil world. They knew about it." Ning Xuema smiled. "Don't worry. Things are different now." Her face was extremely pale, and even her lips were white. However, under this smile, there was a feeling of high spirits, making people only want to believe in her. Bai Zhe didn't say anything, and the 8 divine beasts surrounded the 2 of them even more closely. Half a day later, Bai Zhe finally understood what Ning Xuema meant when she said that today was different from the past. The moment Ning Xuema returned to Emo Palace, head steward He Mu, Emo Palace's 8 law protectors, 16 elders, 32 imperial bodyguards, and many other influential figures of the devil world came out to welcome her. They all knelt on the ground. "Welcome back, Devil Master." The cheers shook the heavens and earth, especially head steward He Mu, who was really considerate to the extreme. When he saw that Ning Xuema's complexion was not good, he immediately ordered people to bring over an extremely comfortable sedan. 2 female law protectors came over and carefully helped her into the sedan, carrying her all the way inside. Ning Xuema had not been back for a long time, but her bedroom was still clean and tidy. There was not even a speck of dust to be found. A quarter of an hour later, Ning Xuema was already resting on her bed. Under her body was a soft, cloud-like bedding. Chapter 1915. Manager Heimu delivered countless types of healing medicine to her. A few female guardians served her in the hall, while the rest of the people were guarding the surroundings of Emo Palace, in case of an attack from other worlds. Everything was so orderly. The 8 mythological beasts initially wanted to run away as soon as they noticed something was wrong. However, when they saw the situation, they were all shocked. Had these devils changed their minds? Weren't the devils only concerned about whether it was beneficial to them? They were ruthless. What happened this time? They were still not at ease. Out of the 8 mythological beasts, 6 of them were eyeing Ning Xuema's sleeping quarters like tigers watching their prey. 2 of them remained inside her sleeping quarters. Bai Zhe and the flying serpent were the most meticulous. They were afraid that these devils were just pretending and secretly plotting against Ning Xuema. Therefore, they checked all the medicine and food delivered to Ning Xuema quietly, to make sure that there was nothing wrong with them, before they allowed Ning Xuema to consume them. For convenience, Bai Zhe and the flying serpent even changed into their female forms. After all, they were male animals, and they were majestic and beautiful in their bones. Their appearance looked valiant and full of vigor. They were the standard masculine women. Their big eyes could scare off a group of people. The 2 of them guarded Ning Xuema's bed on both sides. Except for Shen Nianma, no one was allowed to come close. They had to check the things that were given to Ning Xuema first. General Manager Heimu naturally saw through their wariness. He couldn't help but rub his forehead and try to reason with them. "The 2 of you, this is our devil master, our master, the person we're loyal to with our lives. We definitely won't be disloyal. Don't you think it's a bit too much to guard against us? Bai Zhe did not seem to be flexible at all. We have to be careful during special times. Manager Heimu was speechless. Ning Xuemo rested for a moment and slowly recovered. She waved her hand and said, Bai Zhe, they are on our side. There is no need to guard against them. Heimu, come here. Heimu breathed a sigh of relief and quickly walked forward. Ning Xuemo forced herself to be alert and gave him some instructions. Manager Heimu immediately agreed and went to make arrangements. Ning Xuemo closed her eyes again. Luo Jiuchen had hurt her badly and almost affected her vitality. It would take at least half a month for her to recover. She understood Luo Jiuchen's plan and knew that he was waiting for her to be hunted down so that she could ask him for help. However, he forgot that the current Ning Xuemo was no longer the simple and impetuous little Xuemo of the past. That year, little Xuemo relied on her iron fists to sit on the Devil Lord's throne. She didn't know how to control people. At that time, although there were many obedient subordinates, there were not many loyal subordinates. Moreover, she had just quelled the various rebellions in the Devil World not long ago. The various devil kings of the Devil World had their territories seized by her, and many of them hated her to the core. Even if they obeyed her, they had no choice but to obey. In their bones, they still wanted to overthrow her at all times. Therefore, when she was in trouble, she would become the target of an arrow and end up like that. However, Ning Xuemo now knew how to control people very well. She had also seized good territories for the Devil World, so that they could really rest and recuperate. These people in the Devil World were really respectful and grateful to her. Therefore, even if she was in trouble, they would not rebel. Especially loyal subordinates like Manager Heimu. When she was in trouble, they could only protect her with their lives. Moreover, she had just sealed Zisha a while ago and saved the 6 realms. The people in the 6 realms were no longer hostile to her. Therefore, there were very few people who wanted to take advantage of her. Chapter 1916. After all, Luo Jiuchen wasn't really at odds with her. He was even trying to get her back. In this case, he would at most plot against her behind her back and play some small tricks. But he wouldn't do anything to her in the open. Ning Xuemo had already considered all the pros and cons, which was why she boldly returned to Mo Palace. Firstly, the spiritual power in this place was very strong, which was good for her recuperation. Secondly, with these loyal subordinates here, her and little Nianma's safety was more guaranteed. The facts proved that Ning Xuemo's judgment was very correct. General Manager Heimu redeployed the demons in Mo Palace and protected it like an iron bucket. Even a fly could not fly in. Under such protection, even if there were some demons with evil intentions, they would not dare to act rashly. As for the people from other worlds, most of them did not make a move. Even if there were a few who were provoked by the news released by Luo Jiuchen, they came to take advantage of the situation. Before they could even get close to her palace, they were intercepted by various masters who were lying in ambush in Mo Palace. Not even a complete corpse was left behind. The news that Demon Master Imo was seriously injured and dying had been spread all over the 6 worlds. But there were not many who really came to find trouble. The leaders of other worlds even came to visit her. Of course, people were not united. Some came to visit sincerely, and some came to check on her injuries to see if there were any benefits to be gained. Ning Xuemo rejected all of them with the excuse that she was not feeling well. She did not see anyone. Of course, Head Steward Heimu was a smooth and slick person. He politely sent those people away without losing his poise. Even if those who had evil intentions came, when they saw the heavily guarded Mo Palace and the valiant 8 mythological beasts, who seemed to be looking for an unlucky person to eat meat, they would give up their evil intentions. In the blink of an eye, another 10 days had passed. Ning Xuemo lived a good life in Mo Palace, and her injuries recovered quickly. As for Nianma, he practiced even more diligently. He had to practice hard to make himself stronger, as soon as possible to protect his mother. He would not allow the last incident to happen again. For the past 10 days, the Mo Palace had been calm and peaceful. Although Ning Xuemo had been recuperating in her sleeping quarters, she was still aware of what was happening outside. Luo Jiuchen ascended to the position of Master of Heaven and Earth. In order to let the 6 realms know that he was quite capable, he had already held 3 6 realms conventions, so that the leaders of the 6 realms could recognize him as the new sovereign of the 6 realms. Every time, it would be grand and awe-inspiring, and every time, he would send an invitation to Mo Palace, inviting Ning Xuema to attend. Ning Xuema knew that she couldn't go against him at this time. Although she didn't go herself, she still sent someone to go. Luo Jiuchen couldn't find any fault. Naturally, they couldn't openly attack the demon realm. The 6 realms were in a state of delicate balance. Although it was turbulent inside, it was still peaceful on the surface. Luo Jiuchen was very good at putting on a show. In order to increase his prestige, he did some good things for the 6 realms. Coupled with his smooth and slick way of dealing with people, he slowly gathered some popularity and a group of loyal subordinates. At night, Ning Xuema was resting on the bed with her eyes closed. Outside, head steward Heimu suddenly delivered an invitation card. The invitation was extraordinarily exquisite. It had a silver-white cover with a picture of a towering building. It was the Fantian Palace. It was sent by Luo Jiuchen. On the invitation, he claimed to be the owner of the Fantian Palace. Chapter 1917. It was sent by Luo Jiuchen, and it said that he was the master of Fantian Palace. The general content was that 1 month later, on the 8th day of the 8th month, there would be an auspicious day. Luo Jiuchen would officially ascend to the position of the Master of Heaven and Earth on that day. Therefore, he would hold a celebration and invite Ning Xuema, the Devil Master, to attend. The words were very sincere, and there was a touch of elegance and nobility between the lines. Ning Xuema didn't say anything. She just smiled and tore the invitation, throwing it on the ground. Head steward Heimu understood. He picked up the post and threw it far away. A cold crescent moon hung in the sky, and Ning Xuema stood in the small courtyard. This small courtyard used to be where Shen Jili lived, and everything inside had been restored to its original state. Everything was arranged according to the time when he lived here. Jili, when are you coming back? If you don't come back, your position will really be taken away. Ning Xuema strolled in the small courtyard, her hand on a big tree as she looked at the sky in a daze. Her body was still very weak, but fortunately she could move normally. She slept a little too much during the day, so she couldn't sleep at night. After receiving the invitation, she couldn't sleep even more. Thus, he simply walked out and strolled into the small courtyard. No one had come to this small courtyard for a long time, so it had a kind of cold and cheerless feeling. She walked around the small courtyard and stopped in front of the flower bed. The flower bed was full of weeds, and it looked a little desolate. Ning Xuema squatted down and began to pull the weeds. This was the place he used to take care of carefully. Even if there was no heaven fire flower, he couldn't let it become a place full of weeds. While she was pulling, her fingers suddenly paused. What is this? She saw a small bump, which had just been broken open a little, and was hidden in the weeds. If Ning Xuema didn't pull the weeds, she wouldn't have seen it. Could it be that the heaven fire flower had grown another one? Ning Xuema carefully lifted the soil on the small bump, and then she was stunned. What she saw was a small lotus leaf seedling. The sapling only had 2 tender little buds, dark green like jade. Only the tip of the buds was visible, and it blended well with the surrounding weeds. If Ning Xuema wasn't an expert in all kinds of plants, she wouldn't be able to recognize its species. She felt a little confused. Weren't lotuses supposed to grow in water? Why did it appear in the dry land? She took a closer look and confirmed that it was indeed he. Ning Xuema paused for a moment, then stretched out her finger to touch the tender piece of the seedling. She faintly felt that there seemed to be spiritual energy flowing on it. The tender leaves were extraordinarily tender. As soon as Ning Xuema's finger touched them, they immediately closed their leaves like a mimosa plant. Could this flower have been stolen by Starbeck? Since it is a flower with Reiki, Ning Xuema is determined to raise it well. Lotus likes water, right? Looking at how fragile it looked, perhaps it was due to the lack of water. Ning Xuema ran back to her room, took some clean water, and carefully watered it around it. The tender leaves of the lotus seemed to have sensed the nourishment of the water, and the leaves stretched out again. Ning Xuema originally wanted to remove the weeds around it, but she thought better of it. The tallest tree in the forest would be destroyed by the wind. If she left it here alone, it would be more dangerous. It would be better to let the weeds accompany it. No one would notice it, and it could grow stronger. After taking care of the strange lotus, Ning Xuema went into the house. Lying on the bed that he used to sleep, she fell asleep in a daze. Chapter 1918. Ning Xuema looked at the two people below, and was a little confused. There was an antique bookshelf and an antique desk. There was a ceramic vase on the desk, and a magnolia was blooming in the vase. Little Xuema sat in front of the desk frowning. She held a pen tightly in her hand and was writing. Shenjuli sat next to her and played chess with himself. Time was peaceful, and this scene gave people a warm feeling. I'm so tired. I'm not writing anymore. Little Xuema threw away the pen in her hand and shook her wrist. My arms are sore. It's more tiring than a fight. Shenjuli didn't even look up. Have you written enough for 20 pieces? Little Xuema looked at the papers on the side and counted them. Her beautiful eyebrows wrinkled. 20 is too much. I'm still young. There's no need to write so much. I've actually improved a lot. She picked up a piece of paper that she had just finished writing and ran to Shenjuli. She waved the piece of paper in front of him. Look, look. Ning Xuema also floated down curiously to take a look. After reading, she couldn't help but rub her forehead. Little Xuema didn't have much ink in her stomach. The words were written in a threatening manner and couldn't be considered beautiful. Shenjuli didn't even look at it. He grabbed the piece of paper and flicked it with his fingertips. The paper turned into butterflies. Rewrite. Another 10 pieces. Little Xuema raised her eyebrows. I don't want to write anymore. I'm the devil master. Even if I don't write these things, I'm still living a good life. Why must I write this? She turned and wanted to run out, but Shenjuli stopped her in her tracks. Do you still want to marry me? Little Xuema was about to step out of the door when she retracted her foot and obediently replied, yes. She seemed to have thought of something. She squatted beside Shenjuli's feet and tugged at his sleeve. She seemed to be a little troubled. Julie, we've slept together. Why haven't I grown taller? Pa. Shenjuli placed the chess piece in his hand on the chessboard. He glanced at her and calmly pulled back his sleeve. Your height has nothing to do with whether you live in the same room or not. He pulled back his sleeve and patted her head. Good girl, go practice your calligraphy. Xuema pursed her lips. Then what does my height have to do with it? Don't worry. I will make you grow up and taller in the future. Now go practice your calligraphy. Shenjuli began to play chess again. Little Xuema pouted and went back to practice writing. Ning Xuema looked at this and then looked at that. She now understood that her soul might have transmigrated again, back to 50,000 years ago. It seemed that after she left, little Xuema woke up on her own and regained her lowly appearance. She wondered if Shenjuli had noticed it. Did they sleep together again? It can't be, right? Little Xuema's body was still so small. If Shenjuli did it, wouldn't it destroy the motherland's flower bud? Ning Xuema made random guesses in her heart. Her gaze fell on Shenjuli again. His gaze fell on little Xuema. Ning Xuema always felt that his gaze was a little strange. It was as if he was looking at another person through little Xuema's body. Suddenly, someone knocked on the door of the study 3 times, and a woman's voice could be heard. Julie? Ning Xuema was stunned. She knew that Shenjuli's Fantion Palace usually didn't have outsiders. Why was there suddenly a woman? She called out her name so familiarly. Come in, Shenjuli said without raising his head. A white-clothed woman gracefully walked in with a tray in her hand. On the tray was a bowl of steaming pink porridge. Chapter 1919. Julie, I just made a new bowl of lotus magnolia porridge. Come and have a taste. Ning Xuema was stunned by the woman in white's words. Sister? Shenjuli's sister? Wasn't he a god born from heaven and earth? How could a creature like sister exist? She looked at the woman from head to toe. She looked to be about 20 years old. Her eyebrows were as beautiful as a painting. She was a beauty. When she walked, she seemed to have an otherworldly aura. Her voice was as soft as the clouds. The room was filled with a strange fragrance. The bowl of porridge was cooked very well. Ning Xuema smelled it even in her soul state. Shenjuli didn't seem to care. You don't have to make this. I'm not a greedy person. Have a taste. At least I made it this time. You can't expect me to throw it away again, right? The woman in white put the bowl on the small table next to him. Shenjuli glanced at the bowl of porridge and raised his hand to rub his eyebrows. Suddenly, he looked at little Xuema, who had stopped writing, and was looking at him eagerly. Do you want to eat it? Little Xuema didn't hesitate. Yes. Well, then finish writing the words obediently. As long as you write well, this bowl of porridge is yours. Are you serious? Why would I lie to a child like you? Shenjuli smiled gently. Write quickly. Little Xuema immediately lowered her head and wrote again. This time, she wrote well and quickly. The woman in white's face was a little pale. Julie, this is my gift. Well, that's why I won't waste your gift. I'll use it in the most suitable place. I won't let this bowl of porridge go to waste. The white-clothed woman was speechless. She shook her head and looked at little Xuema, who was copying. Julie, forgive me for saying this, but tomorrow you still have a tough battle to fight. I think you should go into seclusion to recover, instead of staying here to guard the place. This devil master is considered an adult. She has self-control. I don't need to go into seclusion. Shenjuli answered indifferently. He glanced at little Xuema and said, She's very naughty. If you don't keep an eye on her, she won't be obedient. Even a deaf person could hear the affection in his voice. The woman paused for a moment. How about this? I'll keep an eye on her for you. You go and rest first. After all, you just used the snow melting technique to detoxify her. And you have consumed too much of your divine power. It doesn't matter. Shenjuli didn't want to explain anything. The woman pursed her lips and sighed. Do as you wish. Then your big battle tomorrow. I know what to do. Shenjuli interrupted her. What great battle? I'll go too. Little Xuema threw down her pen, her eyes sparkling. Now that you've lost all your martial arts, you'll only cause more trouble if you follow. Tomorrow, stay in the palace and don't run around. Shenjuli's voice was a little strict. Little Xuema didn't say anything. She pouted her little mouth and started to copy again. Ning Xuema looked at everything that was happening below, and her heart suddenly moved. Looking at Shenjuli, it didn't look like he had chased little Xuema out of the palace in the blink of an eye. What exactly happened after that? Was that why he was so ruthless? Or was there a mistake in what Mother Earth had said? Her gaze landed on that woman in white again. Or was it related to her? After a moment, little Xuema finally finished writing a few lines of words. She was still very smart. Once she had the motivation to write, she could learn extremely quickly. Those few lines of words were written quite well. After Shenjuli saw them, he was rather satisfied and passed the bowl of porridge to her. That bowl of porridge had been sitting there for so long, but when it passed through Shenjuli's hands and into little Xuema's hands, it was neither cold nor hot. It was just right. Chapter 1920. Little Xuema's eyes curved into crescents as she ate. She was smiling. Ning Xuema had been following the two of them. She watched as Shenjuli brought little Xuema to a place with abundant spiritual energy to practice for a while. Then, she watched as he brought her to the peak of the mountain. The bright moon hung high in the sky. The mountain breeze blew gently, and the stars twinkled in the sky. He played the guqin leisurely while she sat by the side, hugging her knees and listening. Little Xuema had lost her spiritual energy, so it was easier for her to get sleepy. After listening for a while, she nodded off and fell asleep unknowingly. The sound of the guqin stopped. Shenjuli glanced sideways at her, who was sleeping soundly beside him. He sighed softly and bent over to carry her down the mountain. He walked towards the bedroom. Ning Xuema followed him unknowingly. She didn't know why her heart was in a mess. Although little Xuema was old enough to be an adult, her personality and body were still that of a child. Of course, in this day and age, there were many girls who got married at the age of 12 or 13. Even if Shenjuli had sex with her, she wouldn't be considered a young girl. However, Ning Xuema still felt uncomfortable. She felt that the Almighty wouldn't be so tasteless. However, with Shen Juli's unrestrained personality, he might have had sex with little Xuema again. After all, Ning Xuema had taken over that body and had sex with the Almighty 3 times consecutively. The Almighty had tasted the sweetness. Ning Xuema followed him into the bedroom, feeling conflicted. However, she realized that he had placed little Xuema on the bed and covered her with a blanket. With a wave of his sleeve, he set up another bed in the room and laid down on it. A luminous pearl above his head lit up the room. With a wave of his sleeve, the luminous pearl was covered by something and the room darkened. Ning Xuema could only see Shen Juli's eyes shining faintly in the night. He seemed to be looking at little Xuema. After a while he sighed softly. When will you change back? I've been guarding you all this time, because I wanted you to change back. His voice was low and magnetic to begin with, but now it was even lower. In the darkness of the night, it tugged at one's heartstrings. Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat. Could it be that he had noticed that the current Xuema was different from when she was possessed? Was he waiting for her to possess him again? Ning Xuema circled around the sleeping little Xuema. Possessing a body was not something that could be done just because one wanted to. Right now, she was unable to possess the body and could only be a bystander. Shen Juli seemed to be tossing and turning restlessly. After a while, he put on his clothes and moved the night-luminescent pearl to the table. He held a book and started reading. The sand in the hourglass fell bit by bit. Time passed by slowly. Ning Xuema looked at his shadow in a daze. She looked out of the window and saw that the stars were already flickering. It was obviously late at night. Ning Xuema frowned. As she expected, Shen Juli should be fighting with Luo Jiuchen tomorrow. According to history, Shen Juli had lost half of his divine power to save someone. That was why he had been severely injured in the battle. Luo Jiuchen was a very abnormal opponent. His personality was abnormal, and so was his martial arts. Even if Shen Juli did not lose his divine power, he should have used all his strength to fight with Luo Jiuchen, right? He should be conserving his energy tonight, instead of reading a book here. Ning Xuema looked at the cover of the book he was reading. It was not a book about magic or tactics, but a book about strange things. The book listed some strange things, such as a person having 2 personalities, or reincarnating in someone else's body. Chapter 1921. Shen Juli's gaze fell on the sleeping little Xuema. He whispered, "Could it be that she also has 2 personalities? When will her other personality reappear?" Ning Xuema coughed softly. See, Shen Juli was indeed suspicious. But he suspected that she had 2 personalities. Before she could finish her thought, a suction force from the void suddenly pulled her in. Her vision turned black, and her body sank. Then she slowly opened her eyes and raised her hand to rub her eyebrows. Then she looked at her small hand. It was very solid. Very good, she was possessed again. She looked at the person sitting in front of the table and thought for a while. Then she got out of bed and approached him from behind. Shen Juli seemed to have eyes on the back of his head. He said without turning his head, "Did I wake you up? Go back to sleep. You still have some homework to do tomorrow. I came back to check on you." Ning Xuema chuckled. "Are you raising me as your disciple?" Shen Juli's back stiffened slightly. He turned his head and looked at her from head to toe. "Xuemo?" She hadn't seen him in a long time. She hadn't hugged him in a long time. Although she was hugging him from 50,000 years ago, Ning Xuema didn't care. Ning Xuema lazily yawned. She straightforwardly pulled open his sleeve and sat in his embrace. She greedily sniffed the cold yet familiar scent on his body. She muttered, "Great God, I missed you." She even rubbed her head against his chest. Shen Juli's eyes suddenly lit up. He pulled her away from his arms and looked into her eyes. "Xuemo? You're that Xuemo?" Ning Xuemo raised her head and kissed his chin. "There's only one Xuemo. There's no other." The way she spoke and the way she handled things was very different from the naive and innocent little Xuemo. It was that her. She was the one who had intimate contact with him. Shen Juli's eyes were still fixed on her eyes. That day, she fell asleep halfway through her speech. "What do you mean by 50,000 years?" Ning Xuemo rubbed her eyebrows. Mother Earth had said before that she had transmigrated 50,000 years later, so she definitely couldn't tell anyone about this. She wrapped her arms around his neck and said in a half-joking tone, "Almighty, I've been thinking about you for 50,000 years, sob sob." 50,000 years of time travel was really not easy for her. She had transmigrated here to investigate the truth and change history. She snuggled in his arms like a lazy cat. Shenjuli suddenly raised his hand to cover the light of the night-luminescent pearl with a thick veil. Then, he carried her up and said in a low voice, "I missed you too. You're finally back." A white light flashed from her body, and her figure returned to the appearance of a 17 or 18-year-old girl. Ning Xuema stared blankly. She looked at her own figure, that had suddenly become impressive, and the corner of her mouth twitched. She naturally knew what Shenjuli wanted to do, but he still had a big battle tomorrow, so it wasn't good for him to expend too much energy. Just as she was placed on the bed, she rolled inwards and pulled the blanket over her. She nestled against the blanket and yawned. "It's getting late, let's sleep separately." She laid with her face facing the wall, and heard some rustling beside the bed. The night-luminescent pearl's light was hazy, but it also left a blurry shadow on the wall. Even though Ning Xuema didn't turn around, she could see his shadow. She saw his shadow slowly taking off his clothes. His movements were still elegant, and he could take off his clothes with a new style. Ning Xuema admired him, but her heart was thumping wildly. Ever since she possessed little Xuema's body again, she had conveniently accepted all the things that happened before. Chapter 1922. Ever since she possessed little Xuema's body again, she had accepted everything that had happened before. After knowing that she had traveled back in time, little Xuema came back automatically. At the same time, her body returned to the appearance of a 12 or 13-year-old. Little Xuema did not know what had happened, but she could feel that Shenjuli had treated her differently from before. Her thoughts were still stuck at the time when Shenjuli saved her. Not only did he not detoxify her, but he also kept her in the quilt, and she fainted from the heat. After she woke up, she did not know why she was on the top of the lonely peak, and why she was still in Shenjuli's arms. She had always liked to be in Shenjuli's arms. When she saw herself in his arms, her eyes immediately curved like the moon, and she asked him, "Julie, are you going to agree to my marriage?" She even touched her face with her small hands, and was a little distressed. "But my face is still scratched. What about the herbs? And where are the herbs? Oh right, you almost suffocated me." At that time, what she said was a little confusing. Shenjuli originally looked at her with a complicated gaze, but after hearing what she said, his expression changed. Without saying anything, he checked her body. After being stunned for a while, he looked at her with an unfathomable gaze. "Did you forget everything that happened just now?" Little Xuema was confused. What happened just now? Shenjuli seemed to be a little shocked at that time. His expression was not right, and he looked at her over and over again. He even reached out his finger and pressed it between her eyebrows to read her memory. After reading her memory, his expression became even more unfathomable. He did not say anything else, and directly took her down the peak. During those few days, Shenjuli treated her very well. Not only did he personally heal the scratches on her body and face, but he also personally urged her to study and learn to read every day. At night, he slept in the same room with her, but they slept on different beds. Little Xuema did not understand, but Shenjuli did not want to. Although the two of them were in the same room, nothing happened. Shenjuli still treated little Xuema as a child, and raised her as a special child. Ning Xuema heaved a sigh of relief when she recalled the memories of little Xuema. It turned out that Shenjuli still had a bottom line. Very good. She had just breathed a sigh of relief when the bed behind her sank slightly. Obviously, Shenjuli had climbed onto her bed. Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat. She instinctively wrapped the blanket around herself. But before she could wrap it tightly, a corner of the blanket was pulled away. Then she felt a warmth on her back. He was hugging her from behind. "That. Almighty, I think it's better if we sleep on separate beds." "Haven't we always slept on separate beds?" Before she could finish her words, he turned around and blocked her lips. His movements were still elegant and steady, but the words he said were far from what she thought. "Tonight, I don't want to sleep on separate beds with you." He said this sentence with his lips close to hers. The pleasant smell of his body completely enveloped Ning Xuema. She was a little dizzy. Although she was not drugged, the blood in her body seemed to be boiling. He hugged her in his arms and kissed her deeply. The kiss made her dizzy and lightheaded, and she could not say a word. She curled up in his arms and could clearly feel the changes in his body. This change made Ning Xuema's face redder, like a freshly cooked crayfish. Actually, she did not want to have sex with him. After all, at this time, he should be conserving his energy and not wasting it. Chapter 1923. Therefore, when her soul was almost drifting after being kissed, she was still able to pull out a wisp of reason to reject him. "Don't. Not tonight." She was shocked when she said that. Her voice was very soft and even had a kind of charm. Her resistance was negligible to Shinjuli. However, he still respected her. He raised his hand to stop her hands from pushing him away, and pushed them above her head. His eyes were extremely deep and dark. When Ning Xuema looked into his eyes, she felt as if she wanted to drown in his gaze. Shinjuli looked at her with such eyes and smiled. "Why not tonight?" His eyes reflected her slightly disheveled clothes, as if he could only see her. Ning Xuema felt as if there was a string in her heart that was gently plucked by someone. She trembled, but still forced herself to say, "You still have a big battle tomorrow. You can't waste too much of your energy." Shinjuli smiled. He rarely smiled, but when he did, it was enough to shake one's soul. "It doesn't matter." He answered her with 3 words and slowly put his fingers on her shoulder. With a slight movement of his fingers, her clothes fell from her shoulder, and her skin was exposed. He kissed her shoulder, while his other hand calmly undid her sash. His movements were methodical, but also very strong. He did not allow anyone to reject him. Ning Xuema was reluctant to reject him. In a blink of an eye, her clothes had already left her body. His skills seemed to have improved. Although his fingertips were very restrained, Ning Xuema's body seemed to be set on fire every time his fingertips touched her. Her blood was boiling, as if she had taken some kind of aphrodisiac. Her heart was filled with a desire because of this fire. She wanted to be one with him, or else she would feel empty and uncomfortable. She panted heavily, and could not help but hold his neck. She spat out a few words. "You've learned it before, right?" He was now comparable to an expert in flirting. He made her lose all her rationality, and let her be utterly defeated. She softened in his arms and let him do whatever he wanted. He rushed in with the force of a thunderbolt. There was also a slight swelling pain, which made her empty heart feel as if it was suddenly filled. She suddenly felt an inexplicable ache in her heart. Her fingers that were originally around his waist and back tightened. Her fingernails left a few marks on his back, as she couldn't help but spit out a few words. "You be gentler." He didn't know how long the lasted until Ning Xuema begged for mercy 3 times. Only then did he stop reluctantly. After cleaning her up, he did not let go of her, and continued to hold her in his arms. Ning Xuema nestled in his embrace, her nose filled with his scent. She felt abnormally at ease, but she did not forget her purpose. She placed her palm on his lower abdomen, wanting to test if the god power in his body had decreased. However, she forgot that this body had lost its power. After she pressed on it, she could not use her psychokinesis to probe. His abdominal muscles were really firm. When he was wearing clothes, he looked like a fairy. When he was not wearing clothes, she did not expect his figure to be so good. The muscles of his six-pack were well defined, with a kind of faintly flowing strength. It felt so good to the touch. Her little hand that was groping around was held by him. He looked at her with a faint smile. "Do you want to do it again?" "Sweat. I don't want it anymore. It would be daybreak if they did it again." Ning Xuema struggled to free her hand. After thinking for a while, she simply asked, "What kind of poison did you use on me again?" Chapter 1924. She was here to change the plot, but she was worried that the established setting would not be easy to change. He had used the method of sleeping with her to cure her of the aphrodisiac. Could it be that there were other poisons in her body that required Shenjuli to cure? If that was the case, he would still be defeated in this battle. No, Shenjuli answered. His eyes were shining in the dark. Shuama, what is going on with you? Ning Shuama's heart skipped a beat, but she pretended to be confused. What do you mean? You are obviously the same soul, but your temperament often changes. Ning Shuama lazily replied. People's temperament will always change. She knew that she could not tell him that she came from 50,000 years in the future, so she thought about it and said something ambiguous. Just like a person, the temperament of 8 or 9 years old is definitely different from the temperament of 20 years old. Right? Shenjuli looked at her with a deep gaze. Do you mean that your temperament now is the same as when you grow up? He was indeed smart. Ning Shuamo yawned. I am tired. I am going to sleep. Let's sleep. She simply turned her body and turned her back to him. There was no movement for a long time. Ning Shuama leaned her ear to listen. When she heard that he was still quiet, she was relieved. Did he fall asleep? It was good that he was asleep. Then, he would have the energy to fight tomorrow and beat Luo Jiuchen up. As long as he won this fight, history would be changed by her. If history was completely changed, she seemed to have lost the memories of Shui Mo and Ning Shuema. Perhaps, little Nianma would disappear without a trace. Also, there was the matter of Shuilan. Thinking of Shuilan, Ning Shuema's heart ached. That person died for her, but she did not have the ability to resurrect him. Can't sleep? Shenjuli's voice suddenly sounded in her ear. Ning Shuema was shocked. You didn't fall asleep either? You're moving around in my arms. Naturally I can't sleep. Shenjuli bluntly accused. It turned out that Ning Shuema had unknowingly turned over in his arms 3 times. Aya, this is not the time to disturb his rest. Ning Shuema got up and was about to get off the bed. I'll go sleep on the other bed. He stretched out his arm and pulled her back into his embrace. Be good and don't move. It's getting late. We really need to sleep. He closed his eyes. Ning Shuema wanted to cry, but no tears came out. It was not easy for her to fall asleep in his arms. Forget it. He was the one who was going to fight tomorrow, not her. If she couldn't sleep now, she could sleep during the day. Is there something on your mind? Shenjuli suddenly asked, but he did not open his eyes. She had so many things on her mind. Now he couldn't even count them. Tell me, I'll solve it for you. Shenjuli hugged her again and rested his chin on her shoulder. His voice sounded lazy. Ning Shuema's heart skipped a beat. She suddenly asked, Guru, if a person a very powerful demon soul is scattered, can you still summon him back? Shenjuli did not open his eyes. Do you have any subordinates whose souls are scattered? He added, your subordinates are not very reliable. You have to pay attention to them. You can't just use your fists to make them yield. Attacking their hearts is the best. Attacking their bodies is the worst. Ning Shuema secretly rolled her eyes. Attacking their hearts is the best. Attacking their bodies is the worst, right? Guru. However, Shenjuli was right. Little Shuema's subordinates were indeed very unreliable. They would become her enemies in the future and directly force her into hell. Chapter 1925. Ning Shuema was still thinking about Shuilan and didn't want him to change the topic again. God, do you have any ideas? Shenjuli nodded without opening his eyes. I can recall them, but it will take some divine power. Who do you want to save? Ning Shuema breathed a sigh of relief and muttered in her heart. Even if I tell you who I want to save now, you won't know, she yawned. I'll tell you later. I'm sleepy. Sleep, sleep. She had to find a way to abduct him 50,000 years later. How should she abduct him? This was a difficult problem. She had so many things on her mind, and thought it would still be difficult for her to fall asleep. But she didn't expect that she would fall asleep soon after lying in his arms. When she woke up, it was already bright outside, and Shenjuli was nowhere to be seen on the bed. Did he go to the appointment? She sat up and found that her clothes were properly put on. Obviously, Shenjuli had put them on for her. There were several dishes on the table outside the bed, and they were steaming hot. There was also a letter on the table with only 4 words on it. Wait for me to come back. She looked at it and saw that it was all her favorite food. So she jumped down, washed up, and ate without hesitation. She actually wanted to go with Shen Jiuli to watch the battle between him and Luo Jiuqin. But he left without even saying goodbye. She didn't know where they were going to fight, so she couldn't find it. She might as well go with the flow. She always felt that there should be something fishy about why little Shuama was kicked out of the Fantian Palace. So she would stay and see what happened. She didn't have any psychokinesis now, so she was like an ordinary person. After eating, she had to wash the dishes. Fantian Palace was a place where immortals lived, so naturally, there was no place to wash dishes. Shen Jiuli obviously didn't need it, but she had to suffer. Fortunately, she knew that there was a pond in the Fantian Palace. The pond water was so clear that she could drink it directly, let alone wash the dishes. She walked to the lake with a pile of plates and squatted down to wash them. She had just washed 2 plates when suddenly, she felt like she was pushed by a hand from behind. She fell into the lake with a splash. Ning Shuama was an excellent swimmer. After she fell into the lake, she didn't panic. After her body fell into the water, she suddenly rushed forward under the water. After she was 3 or 4 feet away from the shore, she then popped her head out. She saw the woman in white, who claimed to be Shen Jiuli's elder sister, standing by the lake. She was the one who pushed her into the water. A dark light flashed in Ning Shuama's eyes. She knew that there was something fishy about this Fantian Palace. Now the fishy thing was here. Was this so-called sister also a peach blossom that like Shen Jiuli? Shen Jiuli had so many admirers. It was so troublesome to pinch them one by one. Ning Shuama paddled twice in the water and looked at her on the shore. The woman in white was also looking at her. Her eyes were a little cold, and even a little condescending. This lake is a sacred lake. It must not be tainted by any filthy things. Why are you washing dishes by the lake? Don't you understand this? The woman in white reprimanded her first. Ning Shuama looked up at her and asked, "Does this Fantian Palace belong to Jiuli or you?" The woman choked. "What do you mean?" Ning Shuama said lightly, "Jiuli asked me to wash the dishes here, but you said that I can't. In this Fantian Palace, do you think you can make decisions for Jiuli?" She believed that Shen Jiuli would never punish her for such a trivial matter. She simply used him to shut the woman's mouth. Shen Jiuli was not in the palace, and her little body had lost its power. It would not be good for her to fight with this woman. Chapter 1926. Ning Shuama understood this very well. Sure enough, when she said that it was Shen Jiuli's instruction, the woman's arrogance was reduced. She pursed her lips and said, "Jiuli likes cleanliness. He wouldn't ask you to wash the dishes here. Where else can I wash if not here?" Ning Shuama raised her eyebrows. This was the only place in the whole Fantian Palace that had water. The woman looked at the greasy bowls and chopsticks on the ground. She flicked her sleeves and cast a cleaning spell. The plates and bowls were clean and new. The woman's voice was cold and proud. "Isn't this good?" Ning Shuama climbed ashore from the other side. She twisted her drenched clothes and wrinkled her eyebrows. Damn it, it was so troublesome without psychokinesis. She looked at the clean plates and bowls. Her eyes curved into crescents. She smiled and said, "This is really convenient. Sister, since you said so, you must have promised to wash the dishes for me in the future. Well, I'll send the used bowls directly to your room and let you cast this spell." The woman was speechless. Her face turned cold. "I'm not your sister. Don't call me that." Ning Shuama opened her eyes wide. "What do you mean by calling me that? Since Jiuli calls you sister, as his wife, I naturally have to call you sister." She had an innocent look on her face, which made the woman choke on her words. The woman's pretty face turned pale. Jiuli won't marry you." Ning Shuama raised her eyebrows. "We have slept together, and he has promised to marry me. How do you know that he won't marry me?" The woman's face changed and she blurted out, "You slept together." She looked at Ning Shuama's petite body. "I don't believe it." When Ning Shuama woke up, she discovered that she had reverted back to her appearance when she was 12 or 13 years old. Currently, her face was still childish and her eyes were big and round. Ning Shuama didn't need to look in the mirror to know that she was very cute right now. The woman knew Shen Jiuli's character better. She knew that he would never lay his hands on a little girl. In fact, he was not interested in any woman at all. However, he made an exception for this little devil master. Not only did he bring her into the palace, he even slept with her at night. Even during the day, they were practically glued together. She was shocked and angry at the same time. She looked left and right at the little loli, but she couldn't find anything good about her. The woman in white knew that they were sleeping together. She even reminded Shenjuli about this, implying that he had to be considerate. However, Shenjuli turned a deaf ear to her advice and continued to do his own thing. Sleeping together was possible, but in the same room? Impossible, right? Perhaps this little girl didn't even know what it meant to sleep in the same room. You know what it means to sleep in the same room? The woman asked casually. Ning Xuema glanced at her and then looked at her again. Her bright eyes made the woman's hair stand on end. Why are you looking at me like this? Ning Xuema tilted her head and looked at her. Sister, you're not married yet, right? The woman was speechless. So what? Sister, as an unmarried woman, it's not appropriate for you to talk about sleeping in the same room or not, right? Ning Xuema's face was still as naive as before, but it was enough to infuriate people to death. I feel that you should discuss this matter with your husband in the future. He will naturally teach you. That white-clothed woman was not prepared for her to say such indecent words. Her charming face flushed red. You. Nonsense. Chapter 1927. Ning Xuema blinked her eyes. Does sister think I'm wrong? Sister doesn't want to discuss the matter of sharing a room with my future brother-in-law. But only with a little girl like me? The white-clothed woman's living environment was clearly a lot simpler than Ning Xuema's. She was also much more ethereal. Hearing Ning Xuema's words, she was infuriated. Her eyebrows raised. Are all devils so uneducated? Why do you keep saying that you're in the same room as me? Ning Xuema's eyes widened even more. Isn't sister the one who brought this up? Sister also keeps on talking about sharing a room. It's very cheerful. When the woman in white met her, she felt like a scholar meeting a soldier, unable to explain herself. Her pretty face turned red then white, white then red. Her fingers clenched and then put down. Ning Xuema also felt that it's about time. At this time she should stop while she's ahead. She smiled gently, smiling brightly at the woman in white. Well, I won't discuss this matter with sister, it's embarrassing. Sister can go all out, but I'm thin-skinned so I can't. Goodbye, sister. Later if there are any dirty bowls and chopsticks, I'll send them to sister. She hugged the clean bowls and chopsticks and turned to leave. The woman in white held back for a moment, then coldly said, You're not allowed to call me sister. Well, I won't call you that, then I'm leaving. Auntie, goodbye. Ning Xuema didn't even turn her head. She just waved her hand and disappeared like a wisp of smoke. The woman in white. Auntie? Auntie, am I really that old? She couldn't help but look at herself in the mirror by the lake. Her white dress fluttered. Her facial features were beautiful, and there wasn't a single wrinkle on her face. She looked at Ning Xuema's back disappearing into the cover of the flowers and trees, then suddenly smiled. Her smile seemed to contain a deep meaning. Ning Xuema was practicing martial arts. Because her small body had suffered from qi deviation once, her tendons and veins were blocked, so her mental power was blocked. Therefore, she was unable to practice martial arts. Shenjuli had obviously been helping her recuperate for the past few days. Whether it was the food he gave her or the tea she drank, they all had the meaning of medicine. He even taught her a set of recovery skills, so that she could cultivate whenever she was free. Ning Xuema was sitting cross-legged on the cloud bed in Shenjuli's bedroom. She was deep in thought. The conclusion was that Xuema's expulsion from the palace must have something to do with this woman in white. She had Xuema's memories, so she knew that the woman in white had come to Fantian Palace 3 days ago. At that time, little Xuema had just woken up. Shenjuli gave her a very simple introduction, saying that this woman was called Miao Fan, a very Buddhist name. He asked her to call this woman elder sister. When Shenjuli was in front of her, Miao Fan was still kind to her. But when Shenjuli was not in front of her, the way she looked at little Xuema was not very friendly. But she didn't do anything else. This Miao Fan's cooking skills were very good. For the past 3 days, she had been sending delicious food to Shenjuli every day. Shenjuli ate very little. Basically, little Shuema, this greedy little girl, had taken advantage of it. Little Shuema had a simple temperament and didn't know the sinister nature of people's hearts. She also didn't notice the unfriendliness towards Miao Fan. She even had a good impression of Miao Fan, because she ate a few meals of Miao Fan's food. It seemed that she had foolishly invited Miao Fan to visit her Emo Palace when she had time. She would take her to see the exclusive Devil's Snare Bloodflower. This Miao Fan had lived for many years. Since she claimed to be Shen Juli's elder sister, she must be older than him. Naturally, little Shuema couldn't compare with her scheming. Chapter 1928. Ning Shuema rubbed the space between her brows. If she hadn't transmigrated over, according to the original setting, Shen Juli would have used a forbidden technique to cure her of the aphrodisiac, or whatever poison. She would have lost half of her divine power, and he would definitely go into seclusion to recover. In that case, when he was in seclusion, there would only be this Miao Fan and Shuema alone. If Shen Juli didn't leave the palace, no matter how much this Miao Fan disliked little Shuema, she wouldn't do anything. However, once Shen Juli left the palace, Fantian Palace would become her territory. In that case, how would she deal with little Shuema? Little Shuema wouldn't care about verbal attacks. Even though she was reckless, she should know that she wouldn't have a good ending once she left Fantian Palace. According to the development of history 50,000 years ago, Shen Juli was severely injured in this battle. In that case, was little Shuema chased out of the palace before or after he returned? The version that Mother Earth said that was circulating in the martial world was that Shen Juli had personally injured little Shuema before throwing her out. Ning Shuema didn't believe in this version. She felt that there should be more to it. This Miao Fan had a strong enmity towards little Shuema. According to the development of history, Shen Juli was severely injured when he went out to spar with Luo Jiuchen. Could it be that after he returned, this Miao Fan would talk bad about little Shuema in front of Shen Juli to sow discord, causing Shen Juli to vent all his anger on little Shuema? No. Shen Juli wasn't such a person. He wasn't someone who would easily believe slanderous words. Otherwise, this Miao Fan deliberately put on a show when Shen Juli returned, so that Shen Juli could see little Shuema's unreasonable and overbearing side, thus provoking him to be ruthless towards little Shuema? But it didn't seem right. Little Shuema had lost all her martial arts. What could she have done to anger Shen Juli? Although little Shuema was very naughty, in the situation where she had lost her power, she couldn't do anything too outrageous even if she wanted to. Ning Shuema overturned all kinds of assumptions in the blink of an eye. She was having a headache from thinking about it. He decided not to think about it anymore, and sat down to meditate to recover. Shen Juli had been out for 2 days and still hadn't returned. Ning Shuema's heart was in turmoil. Could it be that the trajectory of history could not be changed? Shen Juli was still injured. These 2 days, she had been living quite comfortably. Shen Juli had actually left her a very exquisite arrangement in his bedroom. Every time it was time to eat, a table of food would appear in his bedroom. The amount was neither too much nor too little, just enough for Ning Shuema to eat. Moreover, these dishes always looked like they had just been prepared. They were steaming hot, fresh, and delicious. This made Ning Shuema feel somewhat puzzled while she was eating heartily. She had already studied the table 4 or 5 times, but she still couldn't figure out where these dishes came from. As for washing the dishes, Ning Shuema kept her promise. She didn't wash them by the lake, but directly sent them to Miao Fan's room. She smiled and asked her to use the cleaning technique to clean them. Miao Fan was sometimes impatient. She would wave her sleeves and turn those bowls and plates into a pile of fragments. She just shrugged her shoulders and didn't take it seriously. It was just a pile of bowls and plates. If they were broken, then so be it. In any case, new plates would be sent to her. The reason why she wanted to clean the old ones was because she didn't want them to look too dirty. The next night, Ning Shuema sent another plate of bowls to her. This time, Miao Fan didn't know what was wrong with her. She was actually kind to her. Shuema, you are Shuema, right? Did I tell you the story of me and Julie? Do you want to hear it? Chapter 1929. Ning Xuema pulled a stool from the side and sat down. She held her chin with her hand and showed a look of interest. Please speak. Miao Fan was choked by her look, and only then did she open her mouth. She talked about a lot of things, including a bunch of random things. Ning Xuema gave her a brief summary. First, Shunjuli crawled out of a lotus. When he first came out, he was thought to be a lotus demon because he looked cute, and was adopted by the water lily deity. Miao Fan was the water lily deity's daughter. The two of them grew up together as childhood sweethearts. It could not be said that they grew up together, because Shunjuli grew up too fast. He already looked like an adult in a year. Miao Fan grew up step by step. When Shunjuli grew up, she still looked like an 8 or 9-year-old child. At this time, Miao Fan's mother finally understood that Shunjuli was not a lotus demon, but a unique god. He had many miracles on him. The mother and daughter felt that they had found a treasure. Miao Fan's mother had the idea of not letting others take advantage of her. She had been secretly proposing marriage to Shunjuli, saying that he and Miao Fan were childhood sweethearts, and that they were a match made in heaven. Second, according to Miao Fan, Shunjuli had already agreed, but they were not in a hurry to get married. They still cultivated separately. She came this time to discuss the wedding date with Shunjuli. At the end, Miao Fan looked at Ning Xuema generously. Although there is nothing between you and Julie, you have lived in his palace. If this spreads, it will affect your reputation. I can persuade Julie to take you as his concubine, but you have to wait until you grow up. You can't be so young. After she finished speaking, her eyes were fixed on Ning Xuema's face. She wanted to see her sad face. She did not expect Ning Xuema to listen to her excitedly. She laughed. So you are his childhood sweetheart, auntie. When he comes back, you can tell him about your plan. After saying that, she skipped away with the plate in her arms, causing Miao Fan to choke. After Ning Xuema returned to her room, she secretly analyzed the situation. This childhood sweetheart should be real. Even Miao Fan's mother wanted to use the favor of raising him to force him to marry Miao Fan should be true. But the so-called Shunjuli's promise was obviously nonsense. Ning Xuema had been in love with Shunjuli for 3 lifetimes. She had long known his temperament. If he wanted to marry someone, he would marry her immediately. He would not have so many scruples. Moreover, judging from Shunjuli's attitude towards Miao Fan, there was a faint sense of alienation. Even if Miao Fan deliberately tried to get close to him, it wouldn't work. How was it possible for him to fall in love with her? If Shunjuli did not love someone, he would not marry her. This Miao Fan could not be the same as Li Ziyin, needing to have a marriage agreement with him to pass the lightning tribulation, right? Li Ziyin was a waste, but this Miao Fan was not. According to Ning Xuema's pair of vicious eyes, this Miao Fan's power had at least reached heaven rank level 6. She could be considered as a genius. She should not have the same experience as Li Ziyin. So Miao Fan's last words were a lie. Shunjuli only treated her as his foster sister. It was even more impossible for him to discuss the wedding date with her. Ning Xuema slightly analyzed and understood the key point. She smiled to herself. Trying to use such words to deceive her? No way. Unless it was to deceive a child. Thinking of this, her heart suddenly moved. She naturally did not believe these words. But what about little Xuema? Would she believe it? That year, this Miao Fan must have said similar words to little Xuema. What would her reaction be? Chapter 1930. Miao Fan must have said similar things to little Xuema in the past. What would her reaction be? She had been entangled with him for 3 lifetimes, before she completely understood his character and character. Little Xuema only blindly worshipped and liked him. She was afraid that she didn't understand this person. She didn't even understand what a real husband and wife should do. When Miao Fan's words fell into her ears, even if she didn't completely believe it, she was afraid that she would be skeptical. However, with her straightforward character, if she had doubts in her heart, she would immediately ask Shunjuli. Then wouldn't Miao Fan be exposed? On the 3rd day, Shunjuli still didn't come back. The news in Fantian Palace was blocked, and Ning Xuema couldn't go out. She began to feel a little anxious. Was Shunjuli still defeated? History didn't change. She was upset, so she ran to Shunjuli's study to look for books to read. She still had to refine the heaven's water poison to restrain Luo Jiuqin, and Shunjuli's study had a lot of books about refining medicine. She often looked for books about this type of book to read in the study these days. She sat at the desk and was absorbed in reading. Suddenly, she smelled a strange smell. The smell was like something burned, but the smell was very light. There was also sandalwood in the room, so the burning smell was mixed with the sandalwood, and it was very difficult to smell. When Ning Xuema noticed it, there was a fire in the corner of the bookcase in the study. It was on fire. She hurriedly patted it, but she didn't expect that the more she patted, the more the fire burned. If she still had her psychokinesis, she could naturally extinguish the fire with a fire extinguishing spell. But she didn't have any psychokinesis now. She could only use the ordinary way to extinguish the fire. But she walked around the study and couldn't find a drop of water. Then she ran outside and wanted to dig some soil to extinguish the fire. But the ground in Fantian Palace was basically covered with green jade and small stones. It looked beautiful at ordinary times, but it was difficult to dig some soil. At this time, she didn't have time to think about anything else. She hurriedly picked up a large vase and ran towards the lake. Fortunately, the lake was not far from the study. Ning Xuema hurriedly drank a bottle of water. When she looked back, she paused for a moment. In just a short moment, the study room was already ablaze. The flame rose to a height of 30 feet, making a loud noise. It was definitely not something that a vase of water could extinguish. Pa! The vase in Ning Xuema's hand fell to the ground and smashed into pieces. The water inside spilled all over the floor. What should they do? When Ning Xuema and little Nianma were living together, they often visited Shunjuli's study room. Naturally, they were familiar with the layout of his study room and the collection of books in it. In the past few days, when she was reading in the study room, she found that there were many books that didn't exist even after 50,000 years. Many of them were treasures that should be collected. At that time, she was a little puzzled. Why didn't these books exist after 50,000 years? So it was burned. This was most likely Miao Fan's trick to set up little Xuema. Little Xuema was not very fond of reading. She even hated it a little. Shunjuli knew this. If little Xuema was at home, Shunjuli would definitely ask Miao Fan to supervise little Xuema to read when he went out. Miao Fan would make a fuss about it. When little Xuema was in the study room, she secretly hid something to set the bookshelf on fire. She burned Shunjuli's books. When Shunjuli returned, she would complain about it. That way, little Xuema would not be able to explain herself. She was most likely injured and kicked out of Fantian Palace because of this. Chapter 1931. Was what was supposed to happen finally happening? Was Shunjuli that easy to fool? She looked at the raging flames and did not react. There was no one else in the Fantian Palace. The 8 mythological beasts were still in their petrified state and could not put out the fire. As for Miao Fan, she was probably hiding in the dark and would definitely not come out to save her. However, even if she knew it was useless, she still had to call for help. Otherwise, Miao Fan would have more to say. She was about to call for Miao Fan when the sky suddenly darkened and heavy rain fell from the sky. The heavy rain was very strange. It only poured down on the study room, but the sun was still shining in other places. Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat. Did Shunjuli come back? Or did Miao Fan think that the fire was almost done and it was time to put on a show? She ran toward the study room. She saw 2 people standing in front of the study room from afar. The girl in white and the man in white were casting spells to summon the water from the sky to extinguish the fire in the study room. Ning Xuema deeply felt that the speed and method of extinguishing the fire was more effective than a fireman's sprinkler. It covered all directions without any blind spots. The man in white was Shunjuli. He seemed to have noticed something and turned his head toward Ning Xuema. The girl in white was naturally Miao Fan. She also looked at Ning Xuema. Xuema. Miao Fan immediately rushed over. Child, what happened to you? Weren't you reading in the study room? Where did you go just now? Jiuli thought that you were burned inside, and rushed in to find you. She talked a lot, and secretly hung a bucket of shit on top of Ning Xuema's head. At this time, the fire in the study room had been completely extinguished. Jiuli coldly glanced at Ning Xuema. His gaze was as cold as ice and snow. A timid person would be frightened by his gaze. I was reading in the study room. The easternmost bookshelf suddenly caught fire. I don't have any psychokinesis, so I could only get water to save it. Ning Xuema explained. That's strange. The light in the study is from a luminous pearl, not a candle. Why would it suddenly catch fire? It can't be. Xuema, I know you don't like to read, but the books in Jiuli's study are all rare and precious. Every book is the result of his hard work. You can't burn them even if you don't like to read them. You brat. I just went to sit down for a while, and you got yourself into such a mess. You even lied. Miao Fan finally put the blame on Xuema's head. Apparently, she had already thought of this speech long ago. There was not a single flaw in it. Ning Xuema's heart was already as bright as snow. She finally understood how little Xuema was framed that year. She had long known that Jiuli loved books. Back then, she had accidentally burned one of his books, and was punished by him. Now she had burned an entire library of books. Therefore, it was reasonable for Jiuli to punish little Nianma when he was furious. She secretly took a deep breath. At that time, little Xuema and Jiuli were not intimate. Jiuli also knew that little Xuema did not like to read. Therefore he believed what Miao Fan said. But now, would he believe her now? She looked at Jiuli and asked, Do you believe me? Jiuli was expressionless. His voice was still cold. The truth is right here. How do you expect me to believe you? There was nothing in the study room that could have caused the fire. The only possibility is that it was man-made. And you were the only one in the study room. Chapter 1932. However, this time it was indeed man-made. But who knows if someone deliberately framed me and put something that could easily ignite the fire in the corner of the study room in advance. At a certain time, it would automatically burn. I did go to the lake to get water to put out the fire. The vase is still there. You can go to the lake to take a look. Ning Xuema's words had a hidden meaning. Miao Fan's face slightly changed. Xuema, what do you mean by this? There are only you and me in this Fantian palace. You said someone framed you. Are you talking about me? Ning Xuema pursed her thin lips. Whoever did it knows clearly. Miao Fan chuckled and looked at Jiuli. Jiuli, look at her. She has been caught red-handed by you, and yet, she is still slandering you. She probably didn't know that half of these books were my collection. Usually, I would feel distressed if a corner was missing. Why would she want to set all these books on fire? Just to frame a child? This is too unreasonable. Xuema, besides, you and I don't have any enmity between us. How could I use this method to harm you? You child. Alas, after all, you are a demon. You can't be raised properly. His words were so dignified that no one could find the slightest flaw in them. Ning Xuema glanced at Miao Fan. If this girl was in the palace, she would definitely be an expert in palace fights. I just don't like to write. It's not that I don't like to read. Even if you don't like to read, you can just not read. Why would you burn the study room? He has always loved books. You know that, so do I. Now that I have lost my power, and am living under someone else's roof, am I looking for trouble by burning his study room? Do you think I am so stupid? Ning Xuema asked back. Although Miao Fan had taken the blame for this, whether she accepted it or not was another matter. As for what you said about having no grievances with me, that is just your excuse. You like him, and want to take him away from me. Therefore you set up this vicious plan to frame me. You are indeed a good person. Miao Fan did not expect Ning Xuema to be so eloquent. She stared blankly for a moment, before she suddenly burst into laughter. She looked at Jiuli and said, Jiuli, with our current relationship, do I still need to resort to such underhanded means to take you away from her? Oh, that's right. She doesn't seem to believe that you and I are already engaged. Why don't you tell her so that she won't deny her wrongdoings? Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat. Was the engagement between her and Jiuli real? She also looked at Jiuli. Jiuli's eyes were cold. Devil Master, Miao Fan and I are indeed engaged. Miao Fan is my fiancé. Ning Xuema's face turned pale, and she couldn't help but take a step back. Are Shenjiuli and Miao Fan really engaged? It can't be. Then how could he still have sex with her so unscrupulously? He even said that he wanted to marry her. Miao Fan sighed at the side. Julie, I don't want your name to be damaged. Look at her pestering you time and time again. She is also infatuated with you. Originally, for the sake of both of your reputations, I wanted to wait for you to come back and persuade you to take her as your concubine. I didn't expect her to be so insatiable that she wanted to monopolize you. Now I understand why she burned the study room. She must have wanted to frame me. Fortunately, the heavens pitied her, and you came back just in time. She was so desperate that she decided to bite back. Chapter 1933. It had to be said that Miao Fan was well prepared. Her words were clear and logical, easily refuting Ning Xuema's words. Ning Xuema's mind was roaring. Compared to burning down the study room, she was more concerned about Shenjiuli and Miao Fan's engagement. If he didn't say it himself, she wouldn't believe it no matter what. Now that she heard him admit it, she felt that she was hallucinating. So after half a day, she was a mistress 50,000 years ago. Shenjiuli actually made her a mistress. Why didn't he say it when he was rolling in the sheets with her? Could it be that in his heart, he still wanted his wife and concubine to live together? But if that was the case, why was he so cold towards Miao Fan? It didn't seem like his attitude towards his fiancée. At this moment, Ning Xuema's mind was filled with these questions. This truth was like a bucket of ice water poured down on her head, chilling her from head to toe. Her first reaction was, did he lie again? Could it be that he had no choice but to tell such a lie? But what was the reason behind his reluctance? Her mind was in a mess, and she didn't hear Miao Fan's words at all. In fact, she didn't need to listen. The truth was right there. No matter how much she and Miao Fan said, it was just a war of words. It depended on who Shenjiuli believed, or who he would rather believe. Devil Lord, what else do you have to say now? Shenjiuli walked over step by step, and stood 10 feet away from her. He stared at her intently. I know you have always been bold and reckless, but I didn't expect you to be so reckless to this extent. I have really misjudged you. Ning Xuema felt cold from head to toe. He said that. Did he believe Miao Fan? So whether Shenjiuli was injured or not, she had to walk the same path as Devil Lord Xuema? She stared at Shenjiuli's face and her lips suddenly hooked up. You only believe her? Shenjiuli said coldly. I only believe what I see with my own eyes. Let me ask you, were you the only one in the study when the fire broke out? Yes. Miao Fan wasn't even there, and you still want to slander her. She can put flammable things inside in advance. Nonsense. Shenjiuli approached step by step. Miao Fan has always been well-educated and reasonable, and has never been jealous of others. She is famous in the immortal world for standing aloof from worldly affairs. Why would she use such despicable means to harm you? Do you mean that my reputation in the 6 realms is not good, so you're willing to believe her this time? Ning Xuema was so angry that she laughed. You know your own reputation in the 6 realms. In order to get what he wanted, he would do anything. I thought you were just a child's possessiveness, so I've always spoiled you and spoiled you. I didn't expect you to do such a thing this time. I originally had no interest in you, but because I raised you, I tolerated your various actions. Now that you don't know what's good for you, don't blame me for being ruthless. Shenjiuli's voice was cold. He raised his sleeve and slapped Ning Xuema's chest. When he slapped, his sleeve brought up a gust of wind. Before his palm arrived, the wind from his palm arrived first. Even though Ning Xuema had lost her psychokinesis, her body movements were still extremely nimble, especially the footwork she learned as a secret agent, which was similar to the wave-like subtle steps. Even though this set of footwork's attack power was not strong, it was a top-notch escape technique. Chapter 1934. What's more, she knew the plot in advance. As soon as she saw Shenjiuli raise his sleeves slightly, she knew something was wrong, and was on full alert. Before his palm reached her, she had already retreated 10 feet at a strange angle like flowing water, just avoiding Shinjuli's palm. However, she couldn't avoid the wind from his palm and was hit by it. He was really ruthless to her. If she couldn't avoid this palm, she would be seriously injured. Something's wrong. Ning Xuema suddenly raised her head and looked at Shinjuli's face. His appearance was right, his figure was right, and his voice was right, but his aura was wrong. Shinjuli had a very special cold fragrance on his body, but that cold fragrance was very faint. One could only smell it if they were very close to him. Moreover, when he attacked with his palm, the aura of the wind from his palm was the same as his own aura. However, the wind from his palm was different from the aura that Ning Xuema usually smelled. Of course, the difference was very small. If one didn't have a very sensitive sense of smell, they wouldn't be able to smell it. Of course, Shinjuli had very few opportunities for people to get close to him. If Ning Xuema didn't have skin contact with him, she wouldn't be able to tell. When she raised her head, Shinjuli's second palm was already coming over. This palm was more ruthless than the first palm, and the coverage area suddenly increased by several times. It was difficult for Ning Xuema to avoid it again. Bang! A sound rang out. Ning Xuema was finally hit, and she rolled away. Her chest felt stuffy. She struggled on the ground, but she couldn't get up. Instead, she spat out a mouthful of blood. Shinjuli looked at her condescendingly. Seeing that I raised you, I won't take your life. From today onwards, get out of Fantian Palace. I don't want to see you again. Ning Xuema slowly stood up bit by bit. Her face was as white as snow. She looked at him with a gaze that contained disbelief, shock, anger, and hatred. Shinjuli, I hate you. She spat out. I don't want to see you again. She seemed to be extremely angry and sad. Tears welled up in her big eyes, but she forced them back. She turned around and slowly walked out of the room. That lonely and desolate figure walked out of Fantian Palace step by step. Behind her back, Shinjuli didn't urge her to stay. Of course, Miaofan didn't either. The palace door slowly closed behind her. Ning Xuema stood at the entrance of the palace. She seemed to be in a daze. She hugged her arms and squatted down. Her entire body was trembling, as if she was suppressing something. After a while, she stood up and looked back at the gate of Fantian Palace. Her fingers were clenched tightly. Shinjuli, I hate you. She couldn't help but cry out as tears slid down her cheeks. Even if you beg me in the future, I won't come back. After saying this, she turned around and left. This time, she didn't look back. She walked past a few corners and directly turned into a Bodhi forest before stopping. The branches and leaves in the Bodhi forest were swaying. She looked around and coughed. She took out a handkerchief and spat out a mouthful of blood. Damn it! My tongue hurt so much. Pretending to vomit blood was also a skill. She had to bite the tip of her tongue and bite it deeper. Are you really injured? A voice suddenly came from behind her. Then, her waist was tightened, and she fell into a warm embrace. Then, she flew up like she was riding a cloud, and landed on a branch with dense leaves. Ning Xuema didn't have time to turn her head around before her wrist was grabbed by someone. 3 fingers were placed on her wrist. Chapter 1935. She obediently laid in his arms and let him check her pulse. After a while, his voice sounded again. Xuema, do you feel uncomfortable anywhere? Ning Xuema nodded and answered honestly. Yes, my tongue hurts. Her body was turned around, and Ning Xuema finally came face to face with the person behind her. He was wearing a wide white robe that was as white as snow. His handsome face was like that of a celestial being. Ning Xuema couldn't be more familiar with this person. Shinjuli, open your mouth. Shinjuli was always so concise. Ning Xuema obediently opened her mouth and showed him the tip of her tongue. There was indeed a wound on the tip of her tongue. She had bitten it quite hard, and it was still bleeding. Shinjuli's eyes darkened. He suddenly pressed her against him and covered her lips with his woo-woo. Her tongue was already injured like this, and he still wanted to kiss her? It would hurt even more if he kissed her. Ning Xuema subconsciously wanted to avoid him, but he had always been very strong. She did not have any skills now, so she could only passively let him kiss her. The tip of his tongue was cool. When it entered her mouth, he applied some medicine on the wound. It actually stopped the pain in an instant, and the wound healed very quickly. So he kissed her to apply medicine for her. Ning Xuema did not struggle anymore. She obediently stayed in his arms and let him kiss her. After the kiss, her tongue was almost healed. Shinjuli slightly let go of her. There was a trace of displeasure in his eyes. Why did you bite so deeply? Ning Xuema pursed her lips. You secretly blocked his palm and told me to pretend to be seriously injured. Since I was seriously injured, how could I not spit out a few mouthfuls of blood? I could only bite the tip of my tongue. The tip of her tongue did not hurt anymore, and her spirit came back a lot. She hugged his arm and her eyes were shining. How was it? Did I act like it just now? His gaze, actions, and tone, I noticed it all. Shenjuli looked at her complacent little face and made a forward comment. Perfect. He was almost fooled by her. When he saw her spit out a few mouthfuls of blood, he thought that he hadn't blocked the attack well enough. In the end, he let someone hurt her. He looked at her in his arms. This little girl was simply too smart. Because everything happened too quickly, he didn't have the time to remind her. He only told her to pretend to be heavily injured and then leave. After blocking that palm strike for her, he didn't have the time to say anything else. From now on, she would have to improvise. He didn't expect this girl to have such a skill. Ning Xuema looked at him with a smile. Can you tell me your plan now? She had done the most important thing with him in bed. And as expected, history had changed a little. Shenjuli wasn't injured this time, so he could come back in time to save her and beat them at their own game. The real history was that Shenjuli was heavily injured in that battle and hid somewhere to recuperate. Then Luo Jiuchen pretended to be Shenjuli and came back to act in front of little Xuema. Little Xuema had never been intimate with Shenjuli, so she naturally believed it and left with serious injuries. Shenjuli's eyes flashed slightly, and he rubbed her head. Wait here obediently. I'll go and deal with those two people first. Ning Xuema pulled him back and quickly told him a few words. Just take advantage of the situation. Now Luo Jiuchen's trick can't be exposed directly. Believe me, this is very important. It will definitely be good for you and me. This show must go on. Chapter 1936. Shenjuli looked at her deeply and replied, Okay. He then turned around and disappeared from her sight. Ning Xuema leaned on the branch and let out a long sigh. She was so tired. It was so tiring to act in this show. She had to keep the show going so that history would not be changed too much. However, as long as she knew that Shenjuli did not betray her and still loved her, she was willing to do it even if it was very tiring. Shenjuli, in order to get you back, in order to let you be reborn, I have to give it my all. She rubbed her eyebrows. She could not tell Shenjuli the real direction of history. Otherwise, she would have to leave again, and she did not know when she could cross over again. If she could not cross over again, perhaps little Xuema would mess things up, or she would turn into a demon again and walk on the road of no return. She would still be cursed, and history would still not change. Shenjuli would still disappear, and Luo Jiuchen would still be the master of heaven and earth. Or, she and Shenjuli would solve the misunderstanding, and from then on, Ning Xuema would have nothing to do with it. Not only would she not have the memory of Xue Yemo and Ning Xuema, but little Nianma would also disappear. Both situations seemed to be very serious, so she might have to suffer a little. However, when she thought of little Xuema's suffering in the future, she could not help but feel cold. Her flesh and blood would be bitten by a group of demons, and she would have to endure the 10 great tortures of the Qing dynasty. She would have to be like a blind man who had his bile taken out. She would have to have a tube inserted in her heart to let someone take her blood. She was panicking just thinking about it. Sigh. If only she could skip the suffering and go straight to the part where she sealed Zisha. On top of the palace wall of Fantian Palace, Shenjuli stood there invisible, watching Ning Xuema's back gradually disappear into the distance. Suddenly, the corners of his lips curled up slightly, as if he was finally relieved. He jumped down from the palace wall and slowly walked back to the study of Fantian Palace. Miao Fan was still staring at the broken wall in a daze. Shen Julie patted her shoulder. What are you thinking? What's so interesting about a pile of bricks? Miao Fan finally regained her senses. She roused her spirit and asked, how is it? Shen Julie smiled. This time, his smile was a little enchanting. Very good. The plan was a success. Miao Fan smiled and said, now that I have done what you asked me to do, what about him? What did you do to him? You promised me that you wouldn't really hurt him. Shen Julie smiled frivolously. I didn't take his life. I just seriously injured him. He is probably still recuperating in some corner of the mountain. He won't be back for a while. You said that you wouldn't seriously injure him. Miao Fan was angry, her almond-shaped eyes widened. I only promised you that I wouldn't take his life. He is a god. He originally has an immortal body. It's not that you don't want his life. It's that you can't take it. Miao Fan exposed him. Shen Julie squinted his eyes and smiled. He sighed and said, Miao Fan, you really know how to be a woman. If I didn't injure him, how could I come back and put on this show with you to make her give up on him? He will definitely come back after he is seriously injured. At that time, you can serve him well. If necessary, you can use some tricks. I don't believe that he won't agree to your marriage. Miao Fan, when necessary, you have to be ruthless. You can't trap the wolf without sacrificing the child. Chapter 1937. Miao Fan pursed her lips tightly. Until now, I still don't understand what you want. As long as Julie doesn't die, or if he doesn't commit a grave mistake, you won't be able to take away the position of the Master God. Shen Julie smiled again. But this time it was a little evil. I have fought with him for so many years. I can only plot against him this time to vent my anger. Also, I like that little girl, and want her to be my wife. Miao Fan's eyes widened. You like her and you still plot against her? Shen Julie looked at her meaningfully. You don't understand. If I don't do this, how can that little girl give up on Shen Julie? She will fall into my arms. All right, Shen Julie should be back soon. You better seduce him as soon as possible. But he values this study the most. When he comes back and finds it burned, I'm afraid. I don't know how to explain it to him. Miao Fan was distressed. Shen Julie looked at her. Stupid. That girl ran away. Aren't you just going to push the blame to her? Say that she ran away to avoid punishment. What's more, he is so injured. The first thing he will do when he comes back is to go into seclusion. Oh, I have an idea. To prevent him from asking about that girl when he comes back. Why don't you go to him now? Don't talk about the fire in the study. Just focus on serving him. It's better for him to go into seclusion on the spot with his injuries. At the end, he told her Shen Julie's address. Miao Fan's eyes lit up. Good idea. I will pack up and go. Shen Julie clapped his hands. All right, you settle Shen Julie yourself. I still have to go and see that girl. He turned and flew away. Miao Fan was happy and nervous at the same time. She turned and ran back, wanting to take enough things and go. Unexpectedly, after running a few steps, she suddenly stopped and looked at the white-robed man standing there. She was stunned for a moment and blinked her eyes. Why are you back? Is there anything else? The man's eyes were cold, and he didn't speak. Miao Fan was puzzled. What's wrong? Is there anything else you haven't explained clearly? Tell me, I'm in a hurry to find him. Where are we going to find him? The man finally spoke. Miao Fan frowned and said, We're going to the valley you mentioned just now. Didn't you say that you had severely injured him? I have to go take a look. The man said slowly, There's no need to go. You don't deserve to visit me. Miao Fan subconsciously said, I'm not visiting you, I'm visiting him. She finally realized that something was wrong and her expression changed. You are. Jiuli. That man looked at her indifferently, his eyes were truly cold. Miao Fan, I didn't expect you to be so despicable. Miao Fan's face turned pale. She did not know how much Shen Julie had heard. She wanted to refute. Julie. You misunderstood. I heard it all. Shen Julie interrupted her and took a step forward. His voice was even colder. From the beginning to the end. Miao Fan. She took a few steps back. Julie, listen to me. She wanted to refute incoherently. But Shenjuli flicked his sleeve. After a while Miao Fan fell to the ground. Her eyes were wide open in horror. She found that not only did her power disappear, her body suddenly shrunk. She couldn't help but raise her arm to look, and her expression changed greatly. Chapter 1938. Her white dress had turned into a red dress, which was exactly the same as the one Shuema was wearing just now. She suddenly had a bad feeling. Julie, what are you doing? Shenjuli looked down at her, his eyes unfathomable. Miao Fan, you disappoint me. You shouldn't have schemed against her. Miao Fan's face turned pale. Julie, I just like you too much. Also, she is a witch after all. She really doesn't deserve you. I did it for your own good. Whether she deserves me or not is my business. It has nothing to do with you. Miao Fan, I don't have any feelings for you. I already told you before I met her. You also said that you wouldn't have any other thoughts, and even got engaged with a venerable from the celestial race. That's why I allowed you to enter the Fantion Palace, and respect you as my sister. You colluded with Luo Jiuchen to scheme against me. Is this how you treat me? Miao Fan bit her lips. I got engaged because I don't want you to completely neglect me. I can't let go of you in my heart. Julie, Mother also hopes that we can become a couple. After all, we are childhood sweethearts and grew up together. Shenjuli looked at her indifferently. Childhood friends? Spending less than 10 days together, you're already childhood sweethearts? When he was born from the lotus, he was a little confused after he came out. He didn't know who he was, or where he was going. He wandered by the water and accidentally saw little Miao Fan being bullied by a wolf spirit. So he saved her and sent her home. He was still a little kid at that time. Miao Fan's mother was grateful to him for saving her daughter. And seeing his rare handsomeness, she said that she was his mother, and asked him to stay. At that time, he saw that everyone else had parents, but he didn't. Now that Lotus Fairy popped out, and said that she was his mother, he believed her. Originally, people who casually claimed to be relatives with gods would be punished by the heavens. So the next day, Lotus Fairy encountered a thunder tribulation, and was almost struck to death. It was Shenjuli who rushed over to block the thunder tribulation for her, and finally saved her life. At the same time, he also understood his identity, and the responsibility he had to bear. He stayed at the Water Lily Fairy's house for a total of 10 days. Of these 10 days, he spent 8 days in seclusion meditating, and absorbing the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. After coming out of seclusion, he left the Water Lily Fairy's home to roam the 6 realms. A year later, when he returned, he was already an elegant young man with the identity of a god. In the past few thousand years, he was grateful to the Water Lotus Fairy for raising him. So he took care of the Water Lotus Fairy and her family. He had helped Water Lotus Fairy withstand 4 lightning tribulations. Originally, Water Lotus Fairy was just a minor immortal. If not for his help, Water Lotus Fairy might not have survived the first lightning tribulation. As for Miao Fan, her aptitude was originally ordinary. It was Shenjuli who refined various divine medicines for her, allowing her to successfully ascend to the immortal realm. With her current status and identity, she became one of the most outstanding women in the immortal realm. She was pursued by various noble immortals, and was even betrothed to a supremacy in the immortal realm. Shenjuli was born with incomparable handsomeness, and was also a high and mighty god. There was not the slightest bit of mortal aura around him, so the number of women who wanted to pursue him was as numerous as carps crossing the river. But he was born with a cold aura, and the powerful aura around him made people want to bow down and worship him. Even if those women had thoughts, they were scared off by his appearance and did not dare to confess. It was as if they felt that if they did, it would be blasphemy to him. Chapter 1939. Even if there were some bold and beautiful women who tried their best to confess to him, they were all coldly rejected by him. Of course, there were even more bold ones who deliberately met him when he was wandering in the 6 realms. They even wanted to climb into his bed when he was sleeping at night. But before they could get close to him, he would throw them into a gloomy and ghostly place with a wave of his sleeve. They were so scared that they wailed like ghosts and howled like wolves. They wandered in that place for a few days before they were released. From then on, they never dared to have any thoughts about him. And Miao Fan was very lucky. With his help, not only did she become one of the best in the immortal world, she could also enter and leave the Fanteon Palace at will. This made the sisters around her almost fall into a sea of jealousy, their eyes green with envy. Miao Fan was elated. She also liked her nominal brother. One day, she finally mustered up the courage to confess. But she was also mercilessly rejected by Shinjiuli. He never saw her again, and she was no longer allowed to enter the Fanteon Palace. This made the Water Lotus Fairy and her family panic. They were originally counting on Shinjiuli to support them. If they lost Shinjiuli, this big tree, they would be beaten back to their original state and become a very ordinary little fairy in a pond in the lower realm. So the Water Lotus Fairy immediately forced Miao Fan to apologize to Shinjiuli, saying that it was just a joke and that she would never dare to think about it. In order to remove Shinjiuli's wariness, Miao Fan also agreed to the marriage proposal of a venerable in the immortal world and held a quite grand engagement ceremony. Before the engagement, Miao Fan knelt in front of the Fanteon Palace for 3 days and stated her position. Finally, she obtained Shinjiuli's forgiveness. He even showed his face at her engagement ceremony, giving her enough face. She could finally enter and leave the Fanteon Palace as an elder sister. The Water Lotus Fairy and her family had just adopted Shinjiuli for a few days, and they were like chickens and dogs rising to heaven. It could be said that they had reaped great benefits. Shinjiuli had been extremely benevolent to her family. He no longer owed her family anything. If they had to talk about what they owed, it would be her family that owed Shinjiuli countless debts. Miao Fan had always wanted to get Shinjiuli. She thought that no matter what she did, Shinjiuli would not do anything to her for the sake of their friendship in the past. That was why she dared to do such a thing. Even if she was exposed by Shinjiuli, she was not really afraid. She looked at Shinjiuli and said, "Julie, I know I was wrong. Can you forgive me this time? I promise I won't do it again." Shinjiuli looked at her. "Do you think there will be a next time? Then I won't dare to do it again, okay? I will still only be your elder sister." She pursed her lips and felt a little wronged. "If you are still not happy, I will apologize to you again. How about that?" Shinjuli's voice was cold. "Miao Fan, offending a god will be punished. What's more, you colluded with an outsider. Not only did you burn down my study, you also forced my wife away." Miao Fan's face changed. How can she be your wife? She is not worthy at all. Mother will not agree." Before she could finish her sentence, Shinjuli flicked his sleeve. Miao Fan could not make a sound. She looked at him with her eyes wide open. Shinjuli was shrouded in a cold aura. He slowly said, "No one has the right to interfere with my marriage, including your mother. Miao Fan, you schemed against Shuama. You have to swallow the bitter fruit you planted." Miao Fan's face changed. To paraphrase a sentence from a certain movie, the gears of fate began to turn, and the wheels of history rolled towards her along the original trajectory. Even if she wanted to regret it now, it was too late. "It's here. Over here." Some people shouted while others cheered. Ning Shuama sat up. She had already recognized the two people running at the front. They were Shuama's two capable subordinates. Demon Master. The two of them were the first to arrive in front of her. They stopped about 3 meters away from her. Their eyes shone with an unfathomable light. "Devil Master, you're finally back. Are you all right? Your subordinates have been very worried about you." Ning Shuama straightened her body. Now that things had come to this, she was still a little nervous. She wanted to endure the pain for a little longer. She opened her mouth to speak, but when she opened it, she couldn't make a single sound. Damn it! That bastard Luo Jiochin had hit her acupoints. Could it be that she couldn't even make a sound when she was suffering? Chapter 1941. When the two people saw her, they looked at each other and took a few steps closer. "Devil Master, how are you?" They looked extremely loyal and concerned, but their eyes were slightly erratic, and there was a hint of greed in their eyes. Ning Xuemo was an expert at observing people's expressions. Just by looking at their expressions, she was able to see through their intentions. They were probably here to get the first piece of the pie. When little Xuema was powerful, these two people followed her around and showed their loyalty to her almost all the time. They were also good at guessing little Xuema's thoughts. No matter what they said or did, they could always get what little Xuema wanted. Little Xuema usually trusted these two people very much. She didn't expect them to be the first to hit her when she was down. The two devils could be said to be people who knew how to take advantage of the situation. When they saw Ning Xuema's appearance, they knew that the rumors were true. The Devil Master had really become a cripple. Devil Master, let us help you up. They looked at each other again, and suddenly, lightning flashed from the left and right. They had yet to reach Ning Xuema when a gust of wind suddenly blew from the ground. This gust of wind was unusually fierce, and it blew all the dust on the ground up. The sky turned dark, and in an instant, they couldn't see anyone on the other side. The two people were stunned and stopped. Their eyes were confused by the wind and sand, and they couldn't open them for a moment. Fortunately, this gust of wind was only a small one. After a moment, the gust of wind disappeared, and the sky became clear again. The two people looked at the opposite side again. Their little Devil Master was still sitting there, and her eyes were full of panic. Not to mention the devil world. Even in any world, it was normal for a gust of wind to appear on the ground. So the two people didn't take it to heart. When they saw the little Devil Master sitting there in a sorry state, their evil intentions rose again, and they laughed sinisterly. Devil Master, why are you sitting on the ground? Come, come, let us serve you well. They reached out and pulled her up. They said to help her up, but their actions were not gentle at all. It could only be described with 4 words, simple and crude. Both of his hands touched Ning Xuema's pulse at the same time. A moment later, he suddenly burst into laughter. Little Devil Master, you also have a day like this. Ning Xuema's eyes were wide and round. Her lips moved as if she wanted to say something, but no words came out. The two devils pinched her cheeks. Little Devil Master, you're not going to scold us for being bold again, are you? Haha, we won't do anything to you. At most, we'll eat you. One of the devils laughed in a particularly wretched manner. We're not eating your flesh and blood, but... He reached out and touched Ning Xuema's chest. You're a little chubby now. Then he pinched her little hand. Your skin is so fair and tender. Just looking at it makes me excited. Don't worry. Your brothers will take good care of you. Haven't you always wanted to get married? We brothers will teach you what to do when you get married, and let you have a good taste of being a man. Once these two devils had no scruples and revealed their true colors, they would casually spout vulgar words that were unbearable to the ears. Ning Xuema just widened her eyes and couldn't say a word. Her little face was green and white, and it was unknown whether it was because she was scared or angry. The two devils looked at the other black shadows running over from afar and frowned. It seemed that many people had received this news. There were too many monks and too little porridge. Such a small person wouldn't be enough to share. The two people looked at each other again, and then said one word. Go! Then, one of them threw Ning Xuema behind him like a broken sack. Chapter 1942. One of them threw Ning Xuema on his back, as if he was throwing a sack. His figure flashed as he fled into the distance, wanting to find a secluded corner to eat. Oh no! Someone beat us to it. Chase them! Chase them! Those who arrived later immediately realized that something was wrong. Smoke billowed as they chased after the two brothers. In the blink of an eye, they were far away. The sound of fighting could be heard in the distance, but the place returned to its former silence. A moment later, a voice suddenly came from a nearby tree. Is this what you meant by taking advantage of the situation? Being taken advantage of by these scumbags? The voice was cold and indifferent, even with a hint of coldness. It was Shun Juli's. Cough, cough, that. I didn't expect them to be so impatient. Another female voice sounded a little lacking in confidence. It was Ning Xuema's voice. Didn't expect? What else did you think, but didn't want to say? Shen Juli's voice was even fainter. Haha, I thought you would save me, but I didn't expect it to be so fast. Ning Xuema hugged one of his arms and shook it fawningly. She sincerely praised. Guru, you are simply the reincarnation of Song Jiang, a timely rain. Just now, when the two demons were running towards her, she thought that since she was going to throw caution to the wind today, she might as well let them bite her twice. Thus, she closed her eyes in resignation. She knew that Luo Jiuchen should be watching in the dark. At most she would lose a few pieces of flesh. She would grit her teeth and bear with it. But she didn't expect a gust of wind to blow. Before she could react, her body was thrown into an embrace, flying up and landing on the tree. She almost sneezed because of the yellow sand blown by the wind. Fortunately, she held it back. She knew who saved her. The warm embrace behind her, and the faint cold fragrance couldn't be anyone else. What she was more concerned about was whether Luo Jiuchen would guess that Shen Juli was the culprit behind her sudden abduction. Would there be any new trouble? After the gust of wind passed, she subconsciously looked down and then opened her mouth in surprise. There was another her on the place where she was sitting below. Her appearance and figure were exactly the same. Even if they were twins, it was impossible for them to look so identical. She watched helplessly as the two devils groped the body double from left to right, taking full advantage of her. A thick layer of sweat appeared on his forehead. She only knew that little Xuema had not lost her virginity, but she did not expect that she would be molested by these people. Fortunately, it was just a substitute. If it was her, that would be terrible. Just by looking at them, she had the anger of chopping off the hands of those two devils. If she had tasted this feeling herself, she would probably have the heart to grind their bones and scatter their ashes. After those people left, Shen Juli opened her acupoint with a palm and talked to her. Shen Juli's expression was not good, and his eyes were not particularly friendly. Xuema, you owe me an explanation. Ning Xuema looked up at him. If she could explain, she would have done so long ago. She also felt uncomfortable holding it in like this, okay? She reached out her small hand and put it in his palm. Then she interlocked their fingers and looked at him sincerely. Almighty, do you believe me? Shen Juli looked into her eyes and sighed after a long time. I believe you. He knew that she had her difficulties, so he didn't press her. He held her in his arms and closed his eyes slightly. Don't bear some things alone. I'll be behind you. Chapter 1943. Just these two short sentences made Ning Xuema's heart suddenly feel warm. Yes, with him behind her back. What was there to be afraid of? She pressed her small face against his chest and listened to his steady and powerful heartbeat. She felt very satisfied. She and he had loved each other for 3 lifetimes, but they were rarely together, and he rarely said anything romantic. She didn't expect him to say these words today. These words were more pleasant than any words of love. It warmed her heart, as if it was soaked in warm water. She cupped her eyes and looked into the distance. There were faint sounds of fighting. It was obvious that the demons were fighting fiercely to get a share of the demon master's meat soup. Julie, did you make that substitute? It really looks like me. It's like a clone of me. Exactly the same. I didn't expect you to have this ability. However, is the body double you made realistic? Would they be able to bite out its true form with just one bite? By the way, what material did you use to make the substitute? Ning Xuema asked a series of questions. Shen Juli also looked in that direction, his eyes unfathomable. He raised his hand and rubbed Ning Xuema's head. Don't worry, it's absolutely real. That Luo Jiuchen must have been watching in the dark. You were actually able to play this kind of game right under his nose. Amazing. Ning Xuema was impressed. Shen Juli's voice was faint. I saw him, but he couldn't see me. In other words, Luo Jiuchen couldn't see that he had switched. By the way, Julie, you've already won this battle. Why did you pretend to lose? This was the most strange thing about Ning Xuema. She almost suspected that Shen Juli had also transmigrated and came to correct history. Shen Juli looked down at her and said calmly, I want to see what this Luo Jiuchen is up to. In fact, he didn't know what was going on. Before he went to the appointment, He had a vague feeling that Luo Jiuchen was setting a trap for him. Especially during the fight, Luo Jiuchen looked as if he was determined to win. Shenjuli felt that his smile was an eyesore. He suddenly felt a little curious about what Luo Jiuchen would do after defeating him, so he deliberately lost. Of course, both sides were masters. His defeat was very skillful, so Luo Jiuchen couldn't tell that he did it on purpose. He pretended to be chased by Luo Jiuchen into a valley. After Luo Jiuchen left, he quietly followed behind to see what new tricks he was up to. As a result, he saw Luo Jiuchen to punish Ning Xuema. As a demigod, Luo Jiuchen usually did things in a proper manner. Even if he wasn't like a god, he was like an unrestrained immortal who wandered the 6 realms. From time to time, he would do good deeds and let people worship his longevity tablet. Even though he had to compete with Shenjuli every few decades, he did not resort to any underhanded means. Every time he lost, he would smile and say, "Let's compete again next time." Then, he would walk away with a wave of his sleeves. He was so carefree that he did not even take a cloud with him. But this time, Luo Jiuchen first schemed against Xuema and poisoned her with the aphrodisiac. If it weren't for Xuema suddenly growing up and changing her personality and having sex with Shenjuli, he was afraid that he would have to use the forbidden technique to detoxify her. At that time, he would have to use half of his divine power, and the competition with Luo Jiuchen had been agreed long ago, so it couldn't be changed. Chapter 1944. At first, Luo Jiuchen might have been hiding his strength. In this competition, his moves were more ruthless and insidious than the previous one. The power of each move was twice as strong as usual. Shenjuli knew that if he really lost half of his divine power, he would be seriously injured this time. He faintly felt that Luo Jiuchen should have other schemes. Since it was a scheme, he had to dig it out fully, and then uproot it. Although Shenjuli was not a special police officer, he had the brain of a special police officer. He simply beat Luo Jiuchen at his own game, and lured the snake out of its hole. He wanted to see what Luo Jiuchen's specific scheme was. What Shenjuli didn't expect was that Luo Jiuchen's target was actually little Xuema. If he hadn't taken action in time and blocked that palm for Xuema, Xuema would have been seriously injured. Even if the God of Heaven was not merciful, he should be impartial in the affairs of the 6 realms, and have a righteous heart. Even a demigod should be like this. Ordinary immortals and demons would not cause the 6 realms to suffer the consequences of evil. But if the god's heart was not righteous, it was easy for him to do things that angered the heavens and people, and then it would be out of control. Even a demigod couldn't do it. So Shenjuli watched quietly this time to see how far he could go. The key to Luo Jiuchen's scheme this time was little Xuema. He seemed to be playing a big game with little Xuema. Shenjuli, the god, was born to be emotionless. He didn't care about anyone or anything, but little Xuema was his weakness. He couldn't let go of her. Especially after they had an intimate relationship, he couldn't let go of her even more. It was not a good thing for a god to have a weakness. It was easy to be used as a threat. So Shenjuli was relatively cold to little Xuema at first. He treated her no differently from the other little spiritual beasts that he had adopted for a few days. Until the day she was poisoned by the aphrodisiac, he could no longer ignore her. After having intimate contact with her, he also understood his own heart. Naturally, he wanted to completely protect her under his wings, and not let her suffer the slightest bit of harm. Of course this time, even though little Xuema didn't say anything, the things she did were very strange, causing him to be puzzled no matter how much he pondered. Although he didn't understand, he still believed in her. Therefore, he made up his mind to stay by her side and save her when she was in danger. He looked into Ning Xuema's eyes. She seemed to want to say something but hesitated. In the end, she turned her eyes away from him. She started to change the topic. "Oh right, Julie, what did you do with your sister? Is she still staying in your Fantion palace?" Shenjuli glanced at the battle in the distance and replied, "She got the punishment she deserved." Shenjuli had always been fair and just. Since Miao Fan had schemed against little Xuema, then little Xuema had to bear the consequences of it. no matter whether it was good or bad. Since the substitute had suffered for her, Ning Xuema also breathed a sigh of relief. She pulled Shenjuli's sleeve and asked, "Should we follow them and have a look?" Shenjuli looked down at her and asked, "Do you want to go?" Ning Xuema rubbed her nose. She actually just wanted to follow them and see if the substitute had been exposed. However, if Shenjuli kept following them and saw that the substitute was bitten all over and suffered from the 10 great tortures of the Qing dynasty, she didn't know if he couldn't help but directly kill these demons and save the substitute. Chapter 1945. If that was the case, there might be a change in the plan. Just as she was hesitating, Shenjuli carried her and flew up. "Since you want to see, I'll bring you there." Ning Xuema. Actually, it was him who wanted to see too, right? What Ning Xuema didn't expect was that in just an hour, the situation had escalated to a white-hot state. Countless corpses of the devil race were strewn all over the ground, including the 2 devils who wanted to take the substitute for themselves. They didn't get any benefits, and had instead paid with their lives. It was just like the saying, humans die for wealth, and birds die for food. The devil master's meat was indeed Tang Seng's meat, but it also depended on whether you had the ability to eat it. Now the substitute was being carried horizontally in the arms of a tall and burly devil. Fresh blood flowed down her red dress, and her little face was forcefully buried in the devil's arms. That was why Ning Xuema couldn't see her expression, but he could see that her body was trembling like a leaf in the wind. There were 7 to 8 other devils surrounding this devil, who was carrying the substitute. Flashes of knives and shadows of swords, fresh blood, and cries of agony splattered all over this wasteland. Even though that devil was strong, he couldn't do it alone. Even a good tiger couldn't fight against a pack of wolves. Soon, he was showing signs of defeat under the attacks of those 7 to 8 devils. In a moment of carelessness, his shoulder even suffered a stab, and he almost threw the girl in his arms away. He probably knew that he couldn't salvage the situation, but he wasn't willing to give away the fat meat in his mouth just like that. He actually took advantage of the fight to take a big bite out of the arm of the girl in his arms, tearing off a piece of flesh. The girl in his arms gave off a grunt like a wild beast that had its mouth tied. Her body instantly stiffened, and it was obvious that she was in extreme pain, yet she couldn't cry out. This scene was abnormally bloody, and even Ning Xuema, who had been on the battlefield for a long time, broke out in cold sweat. If it wasn't for Shenjuli saving her, she would be the one suffering all of this now. Even though he knew from Mother Earth that little Xuema would face this calamity back then, seeing it with his own eyes was still very impactful. Little Xuema had never suffered like this before, but because of her love for Shenjuli, she had to suffer such inhumane torture. It was no wonder that once she regained her freedom, she would immediately turn into a demon and crazily seek revenge. Shenjuli's expression was also extremely ugly. If he really lost this battle with Luo Jiuchen and couldn't come back in time, then his Xuema would really have to endure such torture. Thinking of this, he even felt a little scared and hugged the person in his arms even tighter. Ning Xuema murmured, "Jiuli, the dummy you made looks like a real one. It can bleed and tremble. It doesn't look fake at all." She then looked at the devil that was biting the substitute. After he took a bite and swallowed it, he threw the girl in his arms towards a rather powerful devil that was attacking him. That devil naturally caught her in passing, and thus, the other devils that were on the same side as him all turned their spears towards him. There was another bloody battle, and another round of snatching. More and more devils came to fight over the spoils. The time that the substitute stayed beside the devils became shorter and shorter. Her flesh was being torn apart by the unwilling devils, and she was already covered in blood. Ning Xuema felt the same way. Her eyes were almost red, and she asked Shenjuli in a low voice, "Is that scoundrel Luo Jiuchen still watching nearby?" Shenjuli took a look at a huge tree not far away, and his voice was cold. "He's hiding there. He doesn't have the intention to make a move." Chapter 1946. The scene was too bloody. Even the substitute's little hand had been bitten off, and the palm had been reduced to an incomplete white bone. This was simply a punishment of death by 1,000 cuts. Ning Xuema's face turned pale as she watched. Her fingers clenched tightly in her sleeves. Looking at her substitute being bitten like this, she felt as if she had experienced it herself. She didn't dare to imagine what it would be like to be bitten like this. What kind of mentality did little Xuema have when she was tormented like this? There was a feeling of wanting to kill, wanting to destroy the world. Suddenly her eyes darkened. Shinjuli covered her eyes with his sleeve. Be good, don't look. A long howl came from the distance. The howl shook the surroundings and was quickly approaching. It was obvious that a super big demon had arrived. The other demons who were fighting over the substitute heard the howl and were startled. Their faces changed and they immediately scattered like birds and beasts. Only the demon who was still holding on to Ning Xuema was left. He didn't know if he should throw away the treasure in his hands or run away with it. After a moment of hesitation, he also fiercely tore off a piece of flesh from Ning Xuema. Then he threw her aside and ran away. The substitute's vitality was not ordinary. Even at this point, she still didn't faint. She trembled with all her might and made strange sounds like a beast crying out miserably. That super big demon had finally arrived. He looked at the little person who was trembling on the ground, and his eyes emitted a red light. Ning Xuema recognized that this super big demon was the strongest person besides little Xuema. The flower that made little Xuema unable to grow was also stolen from this demon. His name was Zhu Huan. At that time, after little Xuema defeated Zhu Huan and stole the flower, she didn't care about Zhu Huan's life, and even let him live. When little Xuema was the demon master of the demon world, this person didn't appear again. He must have gone somewhere to recuperate. Now that he had heard the news about little Xuema, he naturally came to share a piece of the cake. Zhu Huan's devil power was extremely high, second only to little Xuema in her heyday. He was also a figure who could do whatever he wanted in the devil world. Other devils were naturally afraid of him. When they saw him, they naturally scattered like birds and beasts. Little devil master, to think that you would have such a day. Zhu Huan picked up the bloody substitute like he was picking up a chick. He used his sleeve to wipe off the blood on her small face. Not bad. Although the substitute had been bitten to the point where there was not a single piece of flesh left intact, her small face was not injured. It was just that it was deathly pale. The substitute hadn't fainted yet. His small mouth opened and closed as if he desperately wanted to say something, but he couldn't. Zhu Huan laughed heartily. Little devil master, why do I feel so happy to see you like this? He suddenly grabbed the substitute's head and kissed her forcefully. The substitute probably wanted to struggle, but she had no strength left. Instead of kissing, it was more like biting. He bit the substitute's lips until they were dripping with blood. Only then did he let go of her in satisfaction. Little devil master, actually I like you a little. Unfortunately, you only have that supreme divinity in your heart. You even desperately tried to stick to him, and changed your mind to ask for his hand in marriage. Do you know that you've completely disgraced the devil race? Now you've been driven out, haven't you? You've been driven out by your lover, haven't you? You're as pathetic as a drowning dog. You still want to count on your lover to save you? Stop dreaming. He's already driven you out. Chapter 1947. The moment he kicked you out and threw you back to the demon realm, he should have known what would happen to you. He hates you and wants you dead. Ha ha ha. Do you know how we got the news of your misfortune? It was that supreme divinity who spread the news. The body double trembled in Zhu Huan's hands and made noises. Zhu Huan laughed. Someone sealed your acupoints? Haha, I'll be kind and undo it for you. I like to hear you scream. He patted her body. After a long while, the body double still made noises and couldn't make any meaningful sound. What a pity. It seems that you're so frightened that you're speechless. Zhu Huan gently stroked her little face with his fingers. It doesn't matter. As long as you can make a sound, I'll take good care of you. He took out a medicine bag from nowhere and sprinkled some powder on the body double's countless wounds. The body double trembled even more violently as her body contorted with all her might. It was clear that the powder had the effect of stimulating the wounds on her body, causing her to feel even more pain. Be good. I'm not harming you. I just want your wounds to heal. I don't have any appetite for such a bloody scene. Let's go, I'll take you home. TSK. I can't bear to see such a little beauty being hurt like this. Zhu Huan proudly carried the body double and ran away, disappearing in the blink of an eye. Shenjuli's hands and feet turned cold as he watched from the tree. He had already vaguely guessed what kind of trap Luo Jiuchen had set for him. That bastard was clearly trying to force the little demon master to become a real crazy demon. Fortunately, he had secretly replaced the body double. Otherwise the consequences would have been unimaginable. He looked up at another tree. Luo Jiuchen was standing there with his eyes downcast, and his fingers clenched tightly, as if he couldn't bear it. Moments later, Luo Jiuchen let out a long sigh. Imo, don't blame me for being cruel. I had no choice. I'll make it up to you in the future. I'll give you the best. He turned around and ran off. Shenjuli's body moved. He wanted to follow, but a pair of small hands suddenly clung onto his neck. Julie, I feel uncomfortable. Shenjuli looked down and was shocked. The face of the person in his arms was extremely pale. Even her lips were white. Xuema. Shenjuli put his fingers on her wrist. What's wrong with you? Ning Xuema's small body was trembling. I feel terrible, so terrible. Her heart was beating abnormally fast. It was like fear, but also like poisoning. She pursed her lips and looked like she was about to cry. My heart hurts. I want to go back to Fantian Palace. Shenjuli looked down at her deeply and said softly, Okay, I'll take you back. In any case, he had already swapped her out. That Miao Fan had gone through all the pain and suffering in Xuema's place. Even if she was driven crazy, she wouldn't be able to do anything. There was no need for him to follow them anymore. Ning Xuema felt like vomiting. She had seen a lot of bloody scenes in her life, so normal bloody scenes were nothing to her. However, when she saw what the body double had gone through, her heart was trembling, because she knew that this was what little Xuema had really gone through. How helpless was she when she went through all this back then? How desperate. Chapter 1948. Just because she loved someone, she was treated like this. Not to mention the innocent little Xuema back then. Even if she was now, if she didn't know the truth in advance, she would also go crazy. It was necessary to become a demon immediately. Although the substitute was fake, the behavior of these demons was real. Right now, Ning Xuema had the urge to cut these devils into 1,000 pieces. Of course, she hated the initiator Luo Jiuchen to the bone. In order to achieve his own selfish desires, this person actually harmed a girl like this. And this girl was even the one he said he loved, pervert. Demon. This person was not a demigod. He was clearly the reincarnation of a demon. If she didn't kill this thief, she would not be a human. Seeing Zhu Huan kissing the substitute, Ning Xuema had an impulse to vomit. It was too disgusting. If Shenjuli hadn't replaced her, she would have been the one suffering all this now. It turned out that little Xuema's condition wasn't as simple as being bitten a few times, or having her heart's blood extracted. Aside from the physical pain, her spirit was also ravaged. It was only natural that she would collapse and her temperament would change greatly. Ning Xuema understood what would happen next. With Shenjuli's personality, he would definitely not allow things to continue to develop. If he didn't allow things to continue to develop, then Zisha wouldn't appear, and she wouldn't have to change her fate in the end, so she couldn't let him continue to watch. To sum up, Ning Xuema simply swallowed a unique poison quietly. In addition, she was already disgusted, so it seemed that she was really weak. Shenjuli took her back to Fantian Palace and immediately treated her. He found out the poison in her body. Fortunately, it was a slow-acting poison, and he cured it in time, so it was not a big problem. Julie, I want to recover my kung fu. In Shenjuli's bedroom, Ning Xuema held Shenjuli's arm and didn't let go. This feeling of not having any kung fu and being at the mercy of others was too unpleasant. She had to get better quickly, so that she could carry out the next step of her plan. Shenjuli understood that she was frightened by the scene and held her in his arms. Don't worry. I will protect you in the future. I will never let you suffer again. Ning Xuema shook her head. I think it's better for me to recover my kung fu on my own. She looked at Shen Juli anxiously. It can't be that my kung fu is completely crippled, right? Never to recover again. No, it's because you went too far in the early stages that your blood vessels were completely blocked. I'll help you slowly recuperate. After a year, your martial arts will return. 1 year. Ning Xuema's jaw almost dropped. That's too long. If she stayed here for too long, she was afraid that her body would die, and little Nianma would cry himself to death. Moreover, Mother Earth said that after little Xuema was rescued by Luo Jiuchen, she recovered all her kung fu in less than half a month. Her kung fu even doubled a few times. That was why she could destroy the world. Could it be that Luo Jiuchen had a very special way to recover? Is there a faster way? I can't wait. Ning Xuema continued to look at him eagerly. Shen Juli was speechless. He tried to persuade her. Xuema, 1 year is not a long time. It's better to recover your kung fu gradually. In the eyes of the immortals, 1 year was indeed a short time. However, to Ning Xuema, it was impossible. She continued to pester Shen Juli, hoping that he would find a faster and better way. She was determined and kissed him on the lips. Juli, help me. Chapter 1949. Her chi deviation this time was definitely related to Shen Juli. Shen Juli already felt guilty towards her, but he couldn't change her insistence. He sighed and said, There is a way, but it will make you suffer a lot. There's really no need. There's a need. It's really necessary. Ning Xuema's eyes lit up when she heard him relenting. She hurriedly said, I'm not afraid of suffering. I have to recover quickly. Shen Juli looked at her for a long time. His gaze was so deep that Ning Xuema's little heart couldn't help but beat faster. Okay. Shen Juli only said one word. Ning Xuema let out a sigh of relief and struck while the iron was hot. When do we start? 10 days later, Shen Juli said concisely. Ning Xuema lowered her eyes and calculated the time. According to Mother Earth, little Xuema suffered for 10 days in the hands of that Zhu Huan before she was rescued by Luo Jiuchen. Can it be a few days earlier? I think we can do it now. Ning Xuema tried to bargain with him. Your poison has just been cured, and your body is still weak. You have to recuperate for 10 days. Shen Juli rejected her flatly. Alright, 10 days it is, it shouldn't be a problem. Alright, have a good rest. I'll come and see you later. Shen Juli stuffed her into the blankets and turned to leave. Ning Xuema faintly felt that Shen Juli should be suspicious of her. This person was extremely smart, and some of her little tricks would probably fall into his eyes. For example, she ate poison herself, and she was so anxious to recover her power. Shen Juli just didn't want to expose her, but it would probably leave a shadow in his heart. But how could she be honest with him? If she was honest, she would probably transmigrate back before she could even say half of it. It wasn't easy for her to transmigrate again. Speaking of which, did she change her fate chart? If it was just a substitute suffering, then the substitute couldn't produce the purple fiend, right? Without Zisha, the world would not have perished. Then Shen Juli would have been able to live here for a long time. Little Xuema would not have died, and Xue Yemo and Ning Xuema would not have been born. Little Nianma would not have been born either. Ning Xuema lay in bed, and felt that she was going to be confused by this unsolvable equation. But how did the purple fiend come about? After he recovered his kung fu, should he be like little Xuema, and go on a killing spree? Those demons in the devil realm, who had once tortured her substitute, must be killed. She had no qualms about killing them. But what about the others? After all, the others were innocent. Was she really going to drag the people of the 6 realms down with her for her own selfish desires? After all, Shen Juli was the guardian of the heavenly Tao. If he suddenly went down to the lower bound and became a demon, he was afraid that Shen Juli would not agree to it. She still had to be his enemy. Ouch. Her head hurt. Ning Xuema held her head and rolled around on the bed. Although she admitted that she was not a good person, it was still very stressful to be the Devil King who destroyed the world. especially when her husband was the guardian of the heavenly Tao. The pressure was magnified countless times. When she was in the devil realm, in order to achieve a realistic effect, she took a very strong poison. Although it was cured now, her head was still a little dizzy and painful. Besides, she was also very tired after a day of torment. Unknowingly she fell asleep. Shen Juli had returned to the bedroom. He sat in front of Ning Xuema's bed. Seeing that she was sleeping soundly, he did not disturb her. He just checked her pulse again. Ning Xuema suddenly moved and murmured unconsciously, "Nianma, what should I do? Mother." Chapter 1950. She muttered a few more words, but the rest was very vague, and he couldn't hear clearly. Shen Juli's fingers that were holding her wrist stiffened. He looked down at her, and didn't move for a long time. After a while, he raised his hand and smoothed the messy hair on her forehead. He seemed to want to do something, but in the end he didn't do it. He sat by her bed and then turned to walk out. Yes, he had already seen that she had swallowed the poison to stop him from following her. Some of her actions were also very abnormal. He had asked her to wait for him on the tree, but she sat alone at the edge of the road to the mortal world. She clearly knew that Luo Jiuchen would plot against her. When she fell into the demon world, she seemed to have known that those demons would take advantage of the situation to catch her. She bravely accepted her fate. Although he didn't like to meddle in other people's business, it didn't mean that he didn't understand the human nature of this world. He knew some of the movements of the demon world like the back of his hand. He was very familiar with most of the demons with names, and had a general understanding of the demons under Xuema's command. He knew that these people were not loyal to Xuema, but because her demon power was too high, they didn't dare to rebel. Most of the demons were not loyal to her. He had previously reminded her, but after all, she didn't understand, and her ability to control her subordinates was not very strong. Once she lost her power, and became an ordinary person, Shen Juli knew what it meant to those demons better than little Xuema. If it was the little Xuema who had not grown up, she might not have been able to predict the situation, and made such a suicidal move. But now Xuema was very smart and tactful. For someone like her to do such a thing, it really made people suspicious. Ning Xuema once asked him if he believed her, and he believed her. He didn't know what was going on, but he inexplicably believed her. He believed that everything she did was for a reason, and had difficulties. But he still hoped that she could be honest with him, and then the two of them could face it together. He didn't want to guess here and there when he knew that something was wrong. And he still misjudged Luo Jiuchen. He thought that Luo Jiuchen would rush out to save Xuema at the critical moment, but he didn't expect that Luo Jiuchen had been watching the fire burning across the river. He had been watching with folded arms. Luo Jiuchen obviously wanted to force Xuema to become a demon. He had become a truly cold-blooded and merciless demon who had slaughtered countless people. Was Luo Jiuchen trying to create a real opponent for him? Did he know that Shen Juli cared about this girl? So he used this trick to force Xuema into becoming a demon, and let him and her fight each other, so that Luo Jiuchen could benefit from it? He had figured out Luo Jiuchen's plot, but what about Xuema? She seemed to have known a lot of things long ago. She seemed to want to change something, but also seemed to want to push something. Now, she was actually talking in her sleep and calling herself mother. In short, her actions were beyond Shen Juli's expectations. If it was someone else who dared to be so secretive in front of him, he would either chase that person out or use some means to dig out that person's background. But not for her. Against her, he couldn't use many means and couldn't use them, so he preferred her to tell him herself. Ning Xuema slept very soundly. When she woke up, she felt refreshed and all the discomfort disappeared. She got up, stretched her hands and feet, and then dressed up in front of the mirror. The mirror reflected her delicate and lovely face, big round eyes, small mouth, and 2 dimples on her face when she smiled. Chapter 1951. This was little Xuema's face, which was also her face when she was 12 or 13 years old. Luo Jiuchen, that bastard, had the heart to lay his hands on such a cute child, and let her suffer so much. What was even more infuriating was that this bastard had caused little Shuema to be so miserable and had replaced Shinjuli as the master of heaven and earth 50,000 years later. Now he was so proud of himself. Just thinking about it made her so angry that she had a toothache. So, she must find a way to kill him. Ning Shuema thought of the heaven's water poison again, and remembered that she was a 7th level alchemist. Her eyes turned slightly. Shinjuli's alchemist level was enough. Why didn't she ask him for advice on how to level up quickly? He was a ready-made master. Thinking of this, she couldn't stay in the house for a moment and ran out. Fanteon Palace was very big. Its layout was a bit similar to Shinjuli's palace on Buddha Lotus Mountain in Tianxi Continent, but it was a few times bigger. There were many pavilions and terraces inside. It was almost as if the scenery was changing with every step, but Ning Shuemo wasn't in the mood to appreciate it. She walked around Fanteon Palace, but still couldn't find Shinjuli's whereabouts. Strange, where did he go? Ning Shuema was puzzled when a melodious sound of the zither suddenly came from afar. Her eyes lit up, and immediately followed the sound of the zither. Soon she got close to the isolated big stone peak. The sound of the zither came from above. Ning Shuema bitterly raised her head to look at it. She had the urge to kick that lonely peak. It was so high. With her current ability, she couldn't go up, and could only wander around below. As the old saying goes, a gentleman listens to the zither but doesn't speak. Ning Shuema pondered for a moment. If she continued to be a gentleman, she definitely couldn't go up. So she took a deep breath and shouted, "I want to go up. Or, you can come down." Her voice wasn't soft and could be heard from afar. But the sound of the zither was still tinkling, and didn't even stop. The circling birds in the sky that were attracted by the sound of the zither became more and more. Could it be that he didn't hear it? Ning Shuema pinched the space between her eyebrows. It wasn't that she wanted to waste her time, but her time was really precious. She wanted to take advantage of these few days to learn alchemy. Should she howl again? Just as she was hesitating, a phoenix cry came from the sky. A big red fire phoenix suddenly flew down and landed at Ning Shuema's feet, nodding at her. Vermilion bird. Her fiery red feathers were overflowing with light, and she stood there with her chest puffed out like a ball of fire. She was both majestic and beautiful. Ning Shuema's heart skipped a beat. Was he sent by Shinjuli? She approached the fire phoenix. The fire phoenix looked at her with its red phoenix eyes, as if it was calculating her weight. It had a sense of superiority. How could a bird look down on her? There was even pressure coming from his body. Ning Shuema's lips curled up slightly. She pulled on its feathers, and jumped on its back in the blink of an eye. The fire phoenix probably wanted to give her a show of strength. Just as Ning Shuema jumped on its back, it let out a long cry and shot up into the sky like a rocket launcher. Fortunately, Ning Shuema knew from its eyes that this little bird was probably going to give her a show of strength. She was already prepared. Just as she landed on its back, she pulled on its feathers tightly. Her body was almost in the air, but she didn't have any intention of falling down. She only cursed in her heart. Shouldn't such a big bird be gliding when taking off? It could actually fly up in a straight line like a helicopter. This was simply unscientific. Although Ning Shuema lost her psychokinesis, fortunately, she didn't lose her strength. Chapter 1952. Although Ning Shuema had lost her psychokinesis, she did not lose her strength. In this lifetime, she had also ridden a few perverted birds, so she already had experience. She was not afraid, but because her body was suspended in the air, almost all of her weight was supported by her two hands. Her small hands were somewhat tight. This vermilion bird probably wanted to test her ability to adapt. Its speed was sometimes fast and sometimes slow. Especially after flying to the peak, it rushed up for a long time, then turned around and swooped down again. After landing, it retracted its wings and stood there arrogantly, continuing to listen to the zither with its neck raised. Obviously, it was urged by Shinjuli to go down to pick up people, and it was a little unwilling to be interrupted. So, it wanted to give Ning Shuema a show of strength and vent its anger. Ning Shuema almost vomited after being tossed around by the vermilion bird. She steadied herself on the vermilion bird's back and suddenly leaned forward. Her two small hands stuffed something into the vermilion bird's ears. Vermilion bird suddenly could not hear anything. In the time it was stunned, Ning Xuema had turned over and ran to Shenjuli's side. Although vermilion bird was not small, its ears were not big. Once something was stuffed into its ears, it would be difficult for it to get it out. Such a beautiful zither sound could not be heard all the time. Vermilion bird was anxiously patting its ears with its wings. After all, its wings weren't as nimble as a human's. After tossing and turning for a long time, it still didn't come out. It also didn't dare to let out a long cry to disturb the supreme divinity. It anxiously circled around in circles, its pair of eyes firmly staring at Ning Xuema. Ning Xuema just acted as if she did not see its murderous gaze. She sat next to Shenjuli and listened to the zither with a smile. The sound of the zither slowly stopped. Shenjuli looked at her and then looked at the vermilion bird who was walking over. He shook his head and said, "Naughty." Vermilion bird stretched out its head and wanted Shenjuli to look at its ears. Shenjuli had no intention of relieving it of its difficulties at all. His fingers gently stroked the strings of the zither as he said lightly, "Who did you offend? Let that person deal with it for you." The vermilion bird understood and could only turn its gaze towards Ning Xuema. Ning Xuema pretended not to see it and pulled Shenjuli's sleeve. "Guru, how about another song?" She felt that the Almighty's music could not only attract birds to listen to it, but it also had the effect of adjusting her meridians. Finally, there seemed to be a little bit of energy in her stomach. What's more, the vermilion bird's ear was stuffed with a feather she plucked from its body. If the Almighty played again and it still couldn't hear it, it would be even more impatient and regretful. Shenjuli looked at her. "Do you know how to play?" Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat. She nodded. "Yes." Shenjuli's eyes flashed and he stepped aside. "Come play a song." Ning Xuema sat in front of the zither and lowered her eyes for a moment. She stretched out her fingers and fell on the zither. Ding ding dong dong. She had memories of little Xuema and knew that little Xuema couldn't sit still. Although she liked to listen to Shenjuli play the zither, she didn't like to play the zither. Shenjuli must have known this as well. He probably wanted to test her by asking her to play the zither. In fact, she couldn't wait to let Shenjuli discover more of her abnormalities and arouse his curiosity so that he could explore the truth for himself. Therefore, she naturally played very hard at this moment. Although her zither skills were not as good as Shenjuli's, she could still be considered a top master. Chapter 1953. Once an expert reached out his hand, he would know whether he was skilled or not. Shenjuli knew that she was an expert when he saw her fingering skills. The tune she played was a little weird, but it was very beautiful and pleasant to the ears. It even gave him a sense of familiarity, but he couldn't remember where he had heard it before. Ning Xuema played "The Moon Reflected in Two Springs," which was originally a classic of the Eru. However, when played with the guqin, it had a different flavor. It was like a clear spring flowing on top of the mountain. Shenjuli listened quietly, deep in thought. With his strong memory, he could remember a good tune forever after listening to it once. He would never forget it. In his memory, he had never heard this song before. But what was with this inexplicable sense of familiarity? A person who obviously didn't know how to play the guqin could suddenly play such a beautiful tune. Other than being possessed by a ghost, there was almost no other explanation. However, the soul was obviously the same. Even if they were twins and looked exactly the same, their souls were still different. This was absolutely impossible to fake. Shenjuli looked at her sideways, speculating all kinds of possibilities. When the song ended, Ning Xuema stopped playing and looked at him. Her eyes were as bright as stars. "How was it? Was it nice?" "Not bad. Where did you learn this tune?" "A place you have never been to," Ning Xuema said tentatively. After saying that, there was a moment of silence. Not bad. She didn't reveal the secret of heaven, so she didn't get sent back. The 6 realms were huge, and there were places that Shenjuli had not been to. He shook his head and said, This is the first time I'm listening to this song that you're playing. Somehow it feels familiar. Ning Xuema's heart suddenly skipped a beat. He felt familiar? When she followed Shun Juli to gain experience in the Tianxi continent, she had played this tune for him. Other times she had never played it. Then how could he feel a sense of familiarity from 50,000 years ago? Could it be that he also transmigrated? No, if he also transmigrated here, he should be able to recognize her. Perhaps his old illness had relapsed, and he had lost his memory when he transmigrated? Did he lose his memory again? Guru, did you forget something? For example, losing a part of your memory? Ning Xuema's eyes sparkled. Shun Juli shook his head. No. He had all of his memories from the moment he was born. It was impossible for him to lose his memories. Think about it again. Maybe you don't even know if you lost it. Ning Xuema didn't give up. Shun Juli glanced at her. Why did you say that I lost my memory? How did you deduce that? Ning Xuema coughed. This song. Actually, I played it for you before. When? Where is it? Ning Xuema rubbed her eyebrows with a headache. The abnormal god didn't let her tell the truth. What should she say? Suddenly she had an idea. In a dream. Looking at Shun Juli's disapproving expression, Ning Xuema continued to talk to him like she was talking in a Zen language. Guru, let me tell you the story of Zhuang Shengxiao's dream of a butterfly. She was very eloquent. She told the story in a clear and logical way, explaining the cause and effect very clearly. Finally she sighed and said, actually, people are very strange sometimes. Sometimes what you think of as a dream might be reality, and what you think of as reality might be a dream. It depends on how you look at it. Maybe both the dream and reality are real. Chapter 1954. Shun Juli listened to her, as if she was beating around the bush. Finally he said slowly, are you saying that some dreams are real? For example, you said that you played this song for me in the dream. But in fact, the dream was real? Smart. Ning Xuemo nodded. In that real dream, not only did you play the guqin in front of me, but you also gave birth to a child. Is the child named Nianmao? Shun Juli sat there, and tapped the stone next to him with a faint smile. Ning Xuema was stunned and blurted out. How do you know so clearly? Have you read my memory? Shun Juli raised his hand and knocked her head. Stupid, the person being read must be awake to read the memory. Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat. She could not tell him, but what if? What if he read her memory? Perhaps he would know the whole truth. However, if he knew, he would also know what would happen next. He was the divine lord who guarded this world. If he knew in advance, would he try to stop it? If that was the case, history would change drastically. Her little Nianmao would not be able to come back. With Shun Juli's character, it was impossible for him to ignore the safety of the 6 realms for a child. Perhaps he would persuade her to have another child in the future. Therefore, when Ning Xuema wanted to ask him to read her memory, she swallowed it back. She stood up and walked around the mountain. Suddenly, she turned to Shun Juli and asked, Great God, have you ever thought that one day, the Fantion Palace will belong to someone else? Shun Juli answered casually, It is just a worldly possession. He meant that he did not care. Ning Xuema pouted. What if that person is Luo Jiuchen? Not only did he take away your divine position, but he also coveted your wife and plotted against your child? Shun Juli frowned slightly and said coldly, He has to have the ability to do so. Ning Xuema coughed. What if? What if he has already done it? He has already snatched your deity position, and is forcing your wife and children to do the same. Shun Juli raised his eyebrows. Does he think I'm dead? Ning Xuema thought to herself, You are indeed dead in that world. Otherwise, that bastard would not dare to be so arrogant. Ning Xuema hugged his arm and said, Master, how can someone like Luo Jiuchen be worthy of being a divine venerable? Don't you think so? His character is too despicable. Shun Juli raised his hand and stroked her hair. Indeed, it's just the heavenly Tao. Don't worry, with me here, he can't overturn the heavens. Ning Xuema sighed inwardly. I was afraid that you wouldn't be here. She sat there plucking at the strings, pondering what to say. Shun Juli picked her up and put her on his lap. He looked into her eyes and said, You have a lot on your mind. Can't you tell me? Ning Xuema leaned lazily in his arms. She had too many misgivings, so naturally, she could not say it out loud. She cheered herself up and hugged his neck. Master, do you have a spell that can let me go back to the past? She wanted to learn this first. If the master knew this, she would not be afraid. If she accidentally let it slip, and was transmigrated back, she could find a way to transmigrate back. Go back to the past. What do you mean? Shenjuli raised his eyebrows. For example, you want to go back to the time when you were just born and wore open-crotch pants. I didn't wear open-crotch pants. Shenjuli did not know whether to laugh or cry, but there was a hint of ridicule in his eyes. You want to go back to that time? Ning Xuema giggled. Maybe I'll have another dream, and I'll be able to see you as a cute child. Chapter 1955. Shenjuli's eyes flickered. You're talking about dreaming again? Again? He was indeed smart, to be able to grasp the key point in her words. Ning Xuema struck while the iron was hot. That's right, who knows, the current you might be my. She suddenly paused. You what? Shenjuli continued to pursue. He's my dearest husband. Ning Xuema changed her words. She almost blurted out the words 50,000 years. She clearly remembered that the last time she had said this sentence, she had returned with a whoosh. She shook his arm. I'm the one asking you, do you have any ideas? Shenjuli shook his head. I've never heard of this before. It's impossible for people to return to the past. That's because you're ignorant and inexperienced. This sister had transmigrated from the future. Ning Xuema rarely met a place where she could embarrass this great god. But it was a pity that she couldn't say it out loud, so she couldn't help but feel unhappy. But if even he didn't have any ideas, then she had to be even more cautious. Speaking of which, she seemed to have the physique of transmigrating while sleeping. When she was in the modern era, she had transmigrated to Tianci continent and became another person. Now that she had transmigrated again, she had directly transmigrated to 50,000 years ago. But since God had given her this physique, he probably wanted to send her over to change her fate, right? She had to grab hold of this opportunity. She couldn't let it go. She had to use every minute and second of transmigrating to this world to do her own things. Ning Xuema finally remembered the reason why she was looking for him. That's right, great God. Can you teach me alchemy? Shenjuli looked at her from head to toe. Are you sure? That year when I taught you alchemy, not only did you destroy a bunch of my medicinal herbs, you even blew up my alchemy furnace. Ning Xuema knew that he was talking about little Xuema's embarrassing childhood, so she coughed. People will change. Now my alchemy skills have reached level 7. Shenjuli sized her up again, suddenly carried her and walked away. Show me how to refine it. Inside the medicine refining room, Ning Xuema skillfully refined a cauldron of level 7 pills. Shenjuli had been watching her from the side. Seeing her skillful movements and techniques, his eyes flashed even more fiercely. Ever since he had slept with Ning Xuema, he had become suspicious of her identity. During the days when Ning Xuema reverted to little Xuema, he secretly went to the devil realm to investigate. He learned about little Xuema's living habits and skills, and knew that she didn't know how to refine medicine at all. The medicine she had was basically given to her by her subordinates. But now, he had suddenly reached the 7th level of alchemy. Combined with what she had said on the mountain peak, an inference formed in his mind. Could she really be from the future? Was that even possible? Great master. What do you think of my refining? Ning Xuema stood on her tiptoes and shook the pill in her hand in front of his eyes. Shenjuli picked it up and looked at it, then nodded. Not bad. Ning Xuema smiled and narrowed her eyes. Do you believe me now? Come quickly tell me, how can I quickly improve my alchemy skills? She was almost hugging his neck like a swing. After she reverted to little Xuema's appearance, she relied on her lowly appearance in front of her sweetheart. So her personality was very lively. Shenjuli looked at her round and bright eyes and calmly said, Is your body better? Ning Xuema was anxious to learn alchemy. So when she heard him ask this, she immediately jumped up and down. Of course. Shenjuli quietly looked at her blushing little face. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.